welcome back to Harris Hall for the afternoon session of the November 28th Board of County Commissioners meeting. Welcome back. For those of you who are coming back, and welcome for the first time, those of you here for the first time. We have a pretty full agenda this afternoon, so we'll dig straight into it. Item 12A, Mr. Mokaisi, will move forward with the Public Works, which is the fourth reading and public hearing on Ordinance 2306 in the matter of amending Lane Code to establish an erosion prevention policy effective January 1st, 2024. A number of citations, which I shall not read out loud because I like it. So we'll move forward with this, and I do have a script in hand. So bear with me as I go through the script. This is a public hearing on a county-initiated application to amend the county's code. Today's date is November 28, 2023, and the order of proceedings for this hearing will be first report by staff, followed by public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. At this point in time, I will call for disclosure of any commissioner or abstentions due to conflicts of interest. And you'll notice that there are 4 commissioners here this afternoon. Commissioner Senega is excused absent, so it will be 4 commissioners for the entirety of the afternoon. For abstentions or
None, Chair.
Commissioner Lovell, none. Commissioner Buck?
None.
Vice Chair Trieger?
None.
And I have none. Then we will look forward to, well, look around. Does anybody challenge the board's qualifications for hearing this ordinance? I see none, so we'll move forward. Next is the hearing. We'll have a report by the staff. And Ms. Mokaisi, I'll ask you to introduce your panel, which is headed by Director Hurley.
Good afternoon, Chair Carr, Commissioners. Thank you for your time this afternoon. We're here to continue the conversation about erosion prevention and development code amendment. Here again with Maria Papagallo. She leads our stormwater program in our construction services division, drainage and city, and our land management division, who's been hard work developing this code. This is our 4th hearing, and it will not be the last. We'll need at least 2 more to finish this up if we're able to make a decision on which code we'd like to. Refresher from last time, we talked about trying to implement a uniform code across the county for erosion prevention.
Pardon me one moment, Dr. Hurley. Can you scoot the mic closer to you, or are you closer to the mic? I'll ask each of the panel members to do the same. We have a little bit of audio. Thank you.
So in our last hearing, we talked about the need for erosion prevention code in 3 different geographic areas. There was the area around the Eugene Springfield urbanized area. There was the Willamette watershed and the coastal watershed. And we were looking at proposing to implement a uniform code across the county to try to hit all the needs. And there are 2 different permits that we're operating under. Given the amount of pushback on that and questions, concerns by the board that we were doing beyond what we needed to for the minimum, and causing additional costs to residents in developing homes, we decided just to focus on the immediate need, which is to develop a code around the urbanized area, Eugene Springfield. And so we're coming back to you with a proposed code around that and a couple different options that we'd like you to choose from today. Or you can take it in another direction when we get to that point. For today, we're going to give you a quick recap of the federal regulations. We won't go into the detail we did last time. I think it's very complicated in detail. And then we'll talk about the changes that we've made to the code since our last hearing. We provide the recommendation to you. And then we'd also like to have additional input about where we go from here with those other sets of code we need to develop, particularly for TMDL and the Willamette watershed. So since our last hearing, we've had meetings with stakeholders, specifically EWEB, Lane County Parks, and internally with our stormwater policy team. We've had individual meetings with each of you to receive guidance on what you'd like to see in this code and your concerns about the process. And we've also met with the Western Builders Association, and we plan to do that in the next iteration of code that we need to develop. Again, all of this stems out of the Clean Water Act, and that Clean Water Act authorized the EPA to develop these programs, and those programs are then administered by the state. So for the DEQ different programs, NPDES, TMDL, we have to answer to the state, and they're receiving their marching orders from the EPA. And so we're not the only county going through this. Across the country, counties and cities are having to develop stormwater code to meet these federal permit programs. All of these programs are designed to help waters of the state meet what the state or EPA calls beneficial uses. And so those are specific uses, and there are specific thresholds around water quality for the standards that we're trying to meet for those beneficial uses. So some examples of the pictures here are fish habitat, recreational contact, fish consumption, drinking water. All those have specific measurable standards for pollutants specific to those types of uses. And so again, we have two specific permit programs. And the first one we call the MS4 or NPDES program. NPDES is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. The MS4 is the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And basically this is an urban program. So we need to have erosion code, and that's what we're here for today, is for our urbanized area around the Eugene Springfield area. So Eugene and Springfield both have their own permits that they operate under. Then the census defined areas around Eugene Springfield is what we're responsible to have urban level code for. The other program that we'll get to for the next round of code is TMDL, total maximum daily load. And so that's around how much of a pollutant daily water body can have to be able to meet those beneficial uses. And so the state has gone through a TMDL for mercury, temperature, and bacteria to protect the Willamette River Basin. And I think I passed to Moria here to talk about the revised code.
So originally the code was intended to cover both the TMDL and MS4 requirements and deadlines, as Dan mentioned. The MS4 permit deadline to have our code is February of 2023, so last February. And then the Willamette River TMDL code is required by 2025. The thought behind countywide code that we previously had presented was code consistency, which results in increased clarity and comprehensibility, and increased efficiency, resulting in reduced permit preparation time and quicker staff review times. However, it's really clear that public outreach is needed, or more public outreach is needed, to develop erosion prevention code outside of the MS4 area. At our last public hearing, the board directed staff to focus on the more urban MS4 permit area where the deadline for code completion is passed. So that's the coverage area that we're presenting erosion prevention code on today. So in the graphic here helps define that area. This MS4 permit area is based on the U.S. Census determined urbanizable land in close proximity to Eugene and Springfield. The MS4 applicable area is what is shown in the map in yellow and bright green. The code we're discussing today is focused on the bright green areas. In the yellow areas, the county has adopted City of Eugene or City of Springfield code within their urban growth boundaries. The city regulates permits in these areas through intergovernmental agreements. Based on the input that we received from the public outreach efforts that Dan previously described, we've updated the code and are presenting two proposed code options for you to review today. The key difference between these code options are that option A provides for protection of sensitive areas, while option B does not. Both code options are included in the board packet using track changes to show how we've edited the code since our last public hearing. In summary, both options meet the county's MS4 Phase 2 general permit with DEQ. We've adjusted the implementation date in the code from January 1st, 2024 to April 1st, 2024 to allow time for public outreach and education, contractor education and plan preparation, and then staff education and program preparation. To be clear, neither option we present today meets DEQ's TMDL for the Willamette River Basin. The disturbance area triggers have not changed in this code. The first is that a project would need to disturb a 1/4 acre to trigger a permit. This is the minimum disturbance area required in the permit. In order to account for smaller construction footprints that include large soil movements, such as a basement excavation project, we've included an additional volume trigger of 400 cubic yards. So that's equal to 1 foot of disturbance over a quarter of an acre, or about 40 large dump truck loads of material. To further illustrate the permit disturbance triggers, the graphic shows a typical more urban quarter-acre parcel identified in the blue hatch. The home footprint in this graphic is approximately 2,600 square feet. If a project involved building this home, installing a driveway, and a septic system, then it would have the potential to disturb the entire parcel and trigger a permit. A small building addition or replacement of a septic system on the parcel would not trigger a permit unless option A is selected and there is a sensitive area on the property, which Lorena will discuss in a moment. A second disturbance trigger that was included is 500 square feet or 20 cubic yard permit trigger for commercial, industrial, or multifamily projects. These projects often involve high volumes of construction materials and have a higher potential to cause erosion and discharge pollutants. This trigger is consistent with code in Eugene and Springfield. In both cities, an erosion prevention permit is triggered for all commercial, industrial, or multifamily projects, and there is no minimum disturbance area or volume trigger. Lorena will now discuss code changes similar in both options.
Talk first about some of the similarities between the two code language options. For both options, we responded to board and to public comments and concerns, and we've added language to clarify exemptions and exceptions for maintenance of landscaping and trail work and natural habitat work. Exemptions are activities that the code does not apply to. Staff have added exemptions for above ground activities that do not disturb the soil, such as pruning and mulching. And then we've also clarified exceptions, which are activities that the code does apply to, but which do not require a permit. So exceptions are listed in our new revised code language, both options, for routine landscape maintenance, plantings, and weed removal that use handheld tools, as opposed to something that's going to get out there with a cat and move a whole lot of soil. Next slide. Both of the code language options have also clarified the emergency construction language. We had some public comment about that as well. Larger emergencies like the Holiday Farm fire are exempt from the code, but the construction permit related emergencies, such as a failed septic or plumbing work or electrical work, that is not exempt, but the work can commence prior to obtaining the permit. A lot of these are going to be smaller and wouldn't even need an erosion prevention permit, but if it does, the contractor can get that permit within 3 days. And that 3-day timeline is consistent with other building department timelines. Sanitation has that wording in their code as well. And it allows people to go out there and start the work prior to getting the permit, since it is an emergency. Staff have also added some language to the code to clarify that this is meant to be an education first enforcement. When we get to enforcement, if we have to get to enforcement, we are focusing on education for our contractors, our applicants, and owners out in the field to correct any measures that need correcting prior to going to any enforcement, and that's been clarified. Both code options also have updates to the definitions. Many updates are just minor edits, but there are a few that are more substantive, and this is where some of the differences also come in. So updates were made based upon the public and board feedback, and for example, we updated water features. That was something that we've talked about back and forth quite a bit. And there are some other ones as well. The main difference is that we have updates based upon option B having removed the sensitive areas protections. Option A includes protections of sensitive areas, option B does not. So in the definitions section for option B, a lot of definitions have been removed just because sensitive areas are gone. The primary difference between option A and option B is sensitive areas. While both code language options keep the quarter-acre disturbance area permit trigger that's coming from the MS4 permit, the option A includes sensitive areas. And in option A, smaller disturbances of 500 square feet or 20 cubic yards that are not within a sensitive area, would require a permit to ensure the protection of that sensitive area. So here are some examples of sensitive areas. The first, slopes of 15% or greater. The illustration shows a couple slopes to either side of 15% and is a good example of how soils, after they've lost their vegetation, if they become impacted by construction work, they can become hardened and slick, and things can easily roll off. Pollution can easily end up someplace where it's not supposed to go. Floodplains are another sensitive area. Floodwaters can inundate a construction site and carry debris and pollutants downstream, affecting natural habitats and neighboring properties. Highly erodible soils are sensitive to erosive forces and can easily break apart and be transported by wind and water. The 50-foot buffer along a water feature protects the natural resource and its habitat. So a poorly planned intrusion could devastate such a natural feature. Disturbances of all these types, in all these types of sensitive areas, have a much higher likelihood of causing erosion and adversely impacting either the environment or adjacent properties or both. Because of this higher risk for erosion in sensitive areas, option A requires an erosion permit for soil disturbances that are smaller than the quarter-acre one-size-fits-all requirement that's within the county's MS4 Phase 2 general permit. To help with the permitting process for smaller environmental organizations and utility projects that we have within sensitive areas, we have created an annual erosion prevention permit. This annual permit would be used for these smaller projects by a utility company or somebody like a natural watershed council, where they have projects of the same type within a year within different areas. The annual permit allows for them to cover a lot of smaller projects under one project and save on paperwork, save on time, and just make it easier for review. Staff recommend that the board approve option A with sensitive area protections, and this slide lists a number of reasons why those protections are warranted. The county has a large percentage of highly erodible soils, and there's a prevalence of floodplains in the county, and especially within the MS4 area. There are many streams and river lengths running through or alongside this MS4 area, and not to mention throughout the entire county. And Eugene and Springfield both maintain similar sensitive area protections, as they have already realized the importance of erosion control in these areas. Disturbances in sensitive areas have a much higher likelihood of causing erosion and infecting waterways, rights of way, and neighboring properties. And approval of option A would help to protect those areas, ensuring healthy natural resources for the benefit of all Lake County.
In order to increase understanding of the erosion prevention code, an erosion prevention and construction materials management manual has been drafted by staff. The intent of this manual is to accompany the code and provide clear guidance to the permittee. This manual includes when a permit is needed, as well as why we have the code, how to design an erosion prevention plan, where different erosion prevention measures are applicable, their installation, operation, maintenance, signs of failure to look out for, and when to remove. Once we receive direction from the board, we will finalize the draft manual and post it to the county's webpage for public comment. The intent for the manual is to be a living document that may be updated as needed.
So we'll be looking for guidance from you on 2 points. The first is to select one of these options or give us guidance on a different direction to take the code. Again, we'll be recommending option A for the sensitive area triggers. We're trying to match as closely as possible as we can to the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield's programs in these urbanized areas where contractors will be operating, and to meet the intent of the stormwater erosion prevention code of keeping sediment out of our waterways and from being tracked out on our roadways. Option B gets closer to the minimum requirements that were required by our permit. The other piece of direction we would like to receive from you today is related to the next piece of code we need to develop, which is the TMDL coverage for the Willamette watershed. The Willamette watershed covers about 3/4 of the county, and we'll need to develop code that is sufficient for meeting DEQ's TMDL program. So there would be one question of whether to do code specifically for this area, for the Willamette Basin, or to wrap in the Mid-Coast Basin, which will be coming in a couple more years. It'll be a similar program, and whether the board would be interested in covering both of those areas at once, or just focusing on the next requirement. Our proposed public involvement process would be stepping up a website with information and links for information about the program, developing a synopsis of proposed code to start the discussion, and inviting public comment, and then advertising with flyers and handouts at our customer service center as people come in for building and land use permits, and then hold a series of public meetings. We could have an open public meeting where people could attend remotely, and then specific outreach to the Builders Association and other organizations such as parks and watershed councils. So again, we'd be looking for your direction on the public outreach measures and where you would like us to see us focus our efforts as we develop the TMDL. That concludes our briefing and subject to your questions.
Well, thank you, I'll state thank you for the responsiveness to the request from the board. Discussions at this point, after the report from the staff, it's time to hear some public testimony. So if anybody is in the room for public testimony, we have a time limit of 3 minutes, and I'm going to ask you in order to step to the mic, state your name for the record, and that will trigger the start of your 3 minutes. We have one person signed up for public testimony, and that is Gary Rose. Now we look for testimony in favor of and in opposition to. Ms. Rose is the only person signed up in opposition to. Ms. Rose, please step forward to the mic and state your name for the record. And keep an eye on the clock on the wall to my left in front of you. 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Gary Rose. I'm a resident of Florence. Very upset here right now. I'm having stuff around. I went to a meeting with these folks that was informed to be the MS4 and MS4 only presented to the county commissioners. We're up here for a third trip now. I thought the board of county commissioners was very, very plain in our last meeting. They told them to come back with a very, very minimum. The MS4 is what was supposed to be presented for you to approve, and I think you was real plain on that point.
Ms. Rose, I'm sorry, could you step closer to the mic?
I'm sorry. So it's my understanding it was the MS4 and MS4 only that was going to be presented for you here today. And I think the county commissioners were very plain for these folks. I don't know that it's your job to come up with a plan. They've had 2 years plus to come up with a plan and present it to you. They presented it to you. You told them to go back and do a minimum. They presented again, exactly the same thing. And now they're in here with the third shot at the apple here. I think this thing needs to be just torn down and started all over again. There's things that I've got here late. I'm sorry, it was a little icy coming back from Florence, so I was slowed up a bit. There is just not the amount of public input that has been placed on this for us to be satisfied with at this time. I asked for, at one point, a rendition of what they was going to present for you today. I've never ever got that. I think I spoke to Lorena about that. I'd like to see the draft so that I can be prepared to come here. And I never did. There was never nothing lighted as far as the draft. Problem we have here is we don't get any information on this until we're here in front of you folks. We have to have some public input. We have to have some involvement. I have at least 30, 40 people behind me. They're not here today because it was my understanding, I told them just to calm down, that we had a meeting with CARE and the staff here, and that was just going to be presented the MS4. Was all they was going to present. But it sounds to me like they're wanting you to give them guidance to go further and further and further in depth to this. I did want to come here today to say thank you to the board for a unanimous vote last time I was here to send this back and come back with, and I believe it was statement was minimum. They have never done that for you. And I think it's time that they understand that they're working for the people, not for the DEQ, not for the state. Some of these regulations that they're gonna want to put in is going to be very cumbersome and very, very expensive. So we have to have some input. We have to have some meetings where we can show our disapproval or approval of this. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Burrows. Ms. Burrows is the last person signed up as of now in Harrisville. Ms. Jones, do we have anyone signed up online for public testimony?
Yes, Chair Farr, I do see quite a few people have at least registered for public testimony. So at this time, if you are wishing to give testimony on this ordinance, please raise your virtual hand and I will call upon you to begin your testimony. I do not see any hands going up. I have 6 people online, but no hands. So I'll wait one more second to see if anyone chooses to speak on this item. And Chair Farr, no one is raising their hand, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And anyone else in Harrisville wish to provide testimony on this ordinance? I see none, so I'll look to the staff for a response.
Sure. I think there's been a misunderstanding. What we are proposing is just for the MS4 area. So the other piece of guidance is just for direction for the next phase of this, which we're required to do. We need to develop code to meet the TMDL requirement by the end of next calendar year for the Willamette River Basin. But what you have in front of you today with the option A and option B is just for the MS4 area. I apologize to Mr. Rose if we had promised to send the draft code to him directly, and that didn't happen. We have had the code posted with the agenda since last Wednesday for public review. That's how we do.
So let me restate that. What we're considering today as we move forward to the next reading is strictly for the MS4 area. And you're asking us to give you guidance on whether to include the Titusville watershed in the Willamette watershed for the next phase.
Let me clarify, Chair Farr. So the first piece of direction we're looking for is which, for the MS4 area, would you rather choose option A or option B or give us other direction? The second piece is, do you agree or do you have input on the public outreach process that we've laid out for the TMDL process? And would you like us to consider the Willamette Basin and the Coast Basin at the same time, or look at those as 2 separate projects?
Is that clear? Thank you. Then any further input from staff based upon the testimony received? Okay, then I will, let's see. We have a choice before us now at this point, board. We'll talk about option A and option B. I'm not going to make a decision on closing or continuing the hearing at this point. So we have a choice, and staff is asking for us to choose either option A or option B, at which point you would prepare a manual and place it online for public scrutiny, public comment. And what is the deadline on that?
We're shooting for the 8th of December, and then we're coming back to you on December 12th, and then again January 30th.
You're anticipating putting the manual online by December 8th. And then people would have until December 12th initially, and then for the subsequent reading, January
30th.
30th. So that's a really extensive public scrutiny and comment period. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just have one question. In the choice of A or B, which is the absolute minimum?
Minimum would be option B.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ball. Further questions?
Are we only doing questions now, or are we?
No.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start with the two areas. I know that you know how to do extensive outreach with the public, so I'm gonna let you do your thing with that and how you recommend doing it. Whether we want to add the coast area now, and you said that that would come in a couple of years.
We don't have a timeline on that.
No timeline. I personally would just stick with the Willamette. That
But can you all slide a little bit further once again, or slide through the microphone? Thank you.
no, thank you. So personally, I would just do the Willamette area. My guess is over the course of the next few years, when they eventually get to the coastal area and their requirements, we will have gone through a lot of due diligence, maybe even modified this a little bit or tweaked it by then, and other counties around the state and around the country will have worked through the requirements and have policies of their own. And we may come to a place where when we do have to add the coastal region, we'll have the language nailed down. That's just my personal preference on that particular answer. When it comes to option A or B, I would prefer to include the sensitive areas. I think it helps with alignment with the city policies, knowing that many of these areas will eventually come in to those districts. I know especially the area south of Churchill. I know that's going to be, it's in our urban reserves right now, will eventually come in. I think it'll be easier to administer that way. And I personally prefer to protect our sensitive areas as well. Those are just, that's just my personal feedback, and I'm interested in hearing what my colleagues have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussion?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Similar to Commissioner Buck, the public outreach, I think you've outlined, it's what you do. Do it, maybe give an update at some point midway with how that's going, how many meetings, who's attended, how many people I know sometimes you reach out to invite people and then they choose not to participate. So just understanding how far and wide you're doing that, just an update on that process. Midpoint would be what I would ask of that. I'm fairly agnostic on whether to add the coast basin in, but Commissioner Buck brings up a good point, which is we could do some good learning with a smaller scope. And then by the time we get to adding that in, maybe have a better, cleaner process. So sure. The real decision in front of us today on the MS4, very much want to appreciate the presentation and the clarification of the distinctions between exceptions and exemptions, and how you've really been thoughtful in allowing for some of the issues that were raised in the last public comment period about people's concerns about smaller projects or just sort of home improvement projects, as well as being responsive in emergency, like failed septic or what have you. So thank you for that. And also really like this annual permit, so that if you have one person pulling multiple small projects, that makes a ton of sense, seems really streamlined. I think when we talk about minimum, what we want to be looking for is minimum just interaction and back and forth and confusion to minimize unnecessary confusion and conversation and mistakes that then have to be go back and repair. And for that reason, I'm also in support of option A to include the sensitive area triggers because of the greater consistency across jurisdictions. Basically, I think that's something we hear from land management and public works and other permitted projects often is just people have a really hard time tracking all the different guidelines and rules and processes across different jurisdictions. So the more we can clean that up and streamline that for the end user, the better we're delivering a service. And that is a way of not doing the minimum, but creating minimal opportunities for confusion, for people being out of compliance and then having to have corrective action, as well as protecting those sensitive areas. They're called sensitive areas for a reason. And the waterways in and around them really need that protection for a number of reasons. So I am supportive of option A. I'm very appreciative of staff's work. Thank you for the clarification in response to the public comment today. That was also my understanding. Your response about what we're actually taking action on today. And get my notes. Yeah, I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Then I have a couple of questions, just a couple of initial questions regarding option A. The definitions are the same in both options. Is that correct? So those are identical. In fact, just about everything is the same in both options, other than the specificity of these sensitive areas. Then you showed a picture of different sensitive areas. Also, there was a slide that gave us kind of the general definition of sensitive areas. Didn't go into great deal of depth. So another question: Springfield and Eugene codes, how closely do they match? You mentioned one instance that they do match. How closely do they match across the board? First off, do they match? But if they don't,
They're not, they don't match perfectly. They each have a little bit different language, but on the larger ideas, yes, they are consistent.
We do have a table that shows all that. We could bring that up. It's just a lot of detail. But the problem is to match. Eugene isn't matching with Springfield exactly. So we've tried to capture something, either in between or picking one of the two.
There are some differences, like in the square footages that may trigger the need for a permit, or it may be their definition of a sensitive area. So Eugene uses a 10% slope as a sensitive area. Springfield uses a 15% slope. But then they also have a hillside overlay in the city that will trigger a permit as well.
now, so maybe I'm just thinking about a part of the reason we're going with is to create an inequality isn't uniformity now. So how
Right? I would just say that we're trying to capture the same types of sensitive areas, but then there's some fine detail of specificity around those. So, for example, slopes. We're trying to protect areas where there's steep slopes. The city of Eugene defines that as 1%. Springfield defines that as another percentage. And so we've picked the spring. So that contractors, when they're thinking about doing a development, they're thinking about these sensitive areas, water features, slopes, those types of things, and then knowing to look for that in our code.
And then I would also add to that, there's things like in Eugene's code, one of their sensitive areas items is drains to a water feature. And when we looked at that, that provides a lot of ambiguity. And so we wanted to provide more structure to that and go with, so that's an item we did not include. We just have floodplains, highly erodible soils per the NRCS erodible soils index, and 15% slopes.
I would just add that the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield have these sensitive area protections in their code for probably 20 years. So people are used to these types of protections.
which is my confusion, some of my concern. It was stating that we're going to be doing this in some cases, quite a few more strike than requires. Consistent. So that's not a reason.
Sure. I think the primary reason is that we're trying to protect these sensitive areas in our waterways. The secondary piece is just trying to have alignment as much as possible between the codes of the types of things we regulate. I don't think in any case we've gone more restrictive or strident than either the Eugene or Springfield code as we're discussing these sensitive areas.
When code and Springfield code don't match, this was on the slopes. Eugene's 10%. Stated that Springfield, which is the less restrictive. Is that uniform? Less restrictive, less restrictive.
I think that's about where we've landed, but we need to go through it.
And that was a request that you received from the board to go as less restrictive as possible to meet the requirements. But you say that we're not meeting the DEQ requirements anyway, right? Is that what, did I hear you say that?
These sensitive area protections are above DEQ minimum.
Above DEQ. So an option A has the sensitive areas, option B does not have the sensitive areas. So let's take out the sensitive areas. How close do, on the other provisions of option A and option B, how close do Eugene and Springfield match there? Not the sensitive areas, but the other provisions. For instance, definitions.
I would say they're fairly close.
I don't know that, I guess with definitions, we looked at other jurisdictions' definitions, but we're not borrowing word for word. So those aren't going to match mirror images.
Okay, so my concept that I had that we're trying to match be the same across jurisdictions. We're not, because we're not going to be the same across jurisdictions. So
We're not
that's
gonna
not,
match, but we're just trying to match.
similar, but not the same. Okay.
As we are in the similar, we're in the same area and we all have the same concerns about our environment, similar environments. And so we're looking to meet those concerns. And so those are going to be similar across.
This is all inside the MS4 area. Then my next question is regarding the sensitive areas. We have the two slides that you put right here. One of them is the show the pictures. I love the pictures. It shows the slopes of 15% or greater sensitive areas. It shows the floodplain, highly erodible soils, and within 50 feet of the water. I want to protect sensitive areas, obviously, and I think that is uniform. I don't think it is not. I get into issues where it becomes a little more subject to interpretation what sensitive areas are, and I worry. Here's my out front worry: is that at some time down the road, on somebody's desk, the definition of the sensitive areas becomes their definition based upon the loose language of what the sensitive area is. So, I worry about that because that is the kind of thing that we hear about today that causes a delay in permitting, a delay in construction, a delay in the families getting into their homes. I need some reassurance that it's very definitive, that if we are protecting sensitive areas, it's highly strictly defined without probability or even possibility of deviating from a strict definition.
I think that we've defined it pretty good in there. And so we have, like for the slope, so 15% slope is what we've included as a definition. So anything that is above that 15 or greater is going to be defined as a sensitive area. We have GIS mapping that the staff use at the customer service center. So as the customer comes in, we're going to be pulling up different layers for their property to show what the slope is, and we can look at their property. Okay, I've got this large property, but I'm going over here for my development, and we can look at that slope in that area and determine what that is. Same for soils. We are using NRCS soil information to establish which ones are the highly erodible soils. Those are going to be mapped, so staff can pull that up, and then this is also going to be in the outward-facing GIS mapping system, so people can pull that up themselves too. And so that's going to be something that I think is going to be very definitive, that we can look at the map and say, yes, this is where you're proposing to do this work, and these are the conditions at that area.
I would just add, again, these protections are similar to the city of Eugene and city of Springfield, where they've been administering this program for 20 years successfully, without a lot of questioning of where these apply. So I think we can administer a similar program where we provide clarity for people.
I'd like to say that successfully on part of the way they look at the staff, but not always successfully is on what use of the product. And you know, the board here has over and over again, we talk about making housing more affordable, doing what we can to make housing more affordable to keep it from being less affordable. And that's why I personally ask for let's keep the standards to the minimum required by law, as opposed to exceeding the standards, even if it is to match jurisdictions surrounding us. Maybe we can get them to match us and not cause houses to be more expensive to build. I don't know. That's why I personally over and over ask you to not exceed standards, to come to the standards. But the last question that I have regarding highly erodible soils, you cited a table that we use for that, or a standards that we use for that?
Yes, it's the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, used to be the Soil Conservation Service. They have standards for erodible soil and a set limit for highly erodible, medium level erosion, low level erosion.
Mapped on that?
What was that?
Are we fully mapped?
Yeah, so our intent was to reduce ambiguity and create a GIS layer that an applicant can just pull up on their property and say, oh, you know, I am needing to, there are sensitive areas on my property. And then the manual provides additional guidance.
And then my final was on the floodplain. Floodplain seems to have grown significantly in the last few years as to what's defined as a floodplain. Can you talk about that a little bit? The sensitive area is inside the floodplain.
It's the FEMA mapped 100-year flood zone.
The FEMA map. What's the date on that FEMA map? Ish, you know, if it's in the last 2 years or in the last 50 years.
Most of the maps in the county are FEMA maps that were studied in 1999. We received new maps that we adopted, a new study from FEMA for the coastal areas in 2020, I believe. And then we have a new study for the Central Lane project, which is going to be the Coast Fork is going to be restudied, but those have not been adopted yet. So I would say for a majority of the county, it's 1999.
And the area inside the MS4 is certainly in the...
It would be those 1999 maps, yeah.
Okay, all right, that's good. And I'm once again, I want to protect sensitive areas as much as possible, but I'm inclined to be in favor of option B at this point in time, because I think we can make our ordinance more strict or easier than loosen up the restrictions on it. And if we're finding that some of the restrictions that we are on sensitive areas that we don't need to put in there, both of these, option A and option B, will meet all the requirements that we have. B meets requirements. Don't need option A. Option B, which is less restrictive. So my choice of this would be to go for less restrictive option B, and then if later we need to take a look at it and add more restrictions, we can do that. It's far easier to add restrictions than to. So that's my discussion on that. My questions. Thank you for being very responsive. Vice Chair Tree.
Thank you, Chair. It just occurred to me, I'm listening to this. So, you know, we can say we want to protect sensitive areas, but then we can not require folks protect sensitive areas. So given that soil erosion is the county's primary illicit discharge, as I'm reading from our packet, if someone develops a property or does repairs or makes changes to a property and there is runoff nearby and we have not adopted option A, they weren't required to permit that, are they not still, is there still recourse to go back and say, hey, your project impacted this sensitive area, whether we call it that or not, this waterway, because there's all this sediment now as a result of your work. So if I'm understanding, what we're really faced with an option is to give folks who are working their property a chance up front to mitigate and adjust their plans or the ways they go about doing their work to prevent runoff. Or we cannot do that, and then if there is runoff, we have to go back later and do it more as a more acrimonious, potentially punitive. So again, with that idea of we want to do the minimum, while it may seem like a bit of a front loading to put another layer of another permit in place for an additional defined area, in this case sensitive areas, which the consistency across jurisdictions is developers are used to looking for sensitive areas requirements in the code. That's an opportunity to do that, right? This is really about a preventive measure. It doesn't mean then if somebody that people can then have all the runoff they want and there's nothing to be done for it. It sets us up for a more contentious situation rather than a proactive one that protects the developer, that potentially gives them some technical assistance in how to move their project forward without having these negative impacts on a sensitive area. Is that right?
That's correct, Vice Chair. Both sets of code, option A and B, also have outcome-based requirements. So if there's sediment to the stream that's visible causing negative impacts, we can go and try to correct that. But that would be reactive. With the sensitive area protections, we're trying to be proactive.
Thank you, Chair. When you say proactive, I've heard now a couple times you've mentioned that Eugene Springfield's been doing this for over 20 years plus. But they also have been doing for 20 years plus being protective of sensitive areas? Well, it seems to me like they've been doing a pretty good job. Would you say so? Do we need any extra litigation, rules, policies to make that better than what it is? I mean, I'm sure we can always get better, but are we talking about 1% better or 25% better?
So, Commissioner, we're not trying to improve on their code. We're trying to, as closely as possible, mirror their code into these areas that don't currently have erosion protections. In the UGB area, where we're currently partnering with Eugene and Springfield to administer their code in those county areas, they already have those protections. What we're talking about today are the other areas, these census-defined areas that extend outside the UGB that don't currently have any protections. So we're trying to match that as closely as possible with the urbanized level.
So then let me ask you just kind of an order question as well. If someone's doing a permitting process construction site out in these areas, are they going to be waiting for their erosion control permit to be approved first before they get any other additional permits? What's the order of magnitude of order that we're talking about here? Does that change anything, or does that clog up the system? Like Chair Farr said, does this make it a little more difficult in the order of things to get things done in a timely fashion? Because time is money in construction these days.
I would think this is a minor permit compared to their building and land use permits, but I'll pass to Lorena, who's been working in our permit section quite.
It's not going to add additional time. It's not like it has to happen outside of.
I'm not asking for additional time. I'm saying, does it have to be done first before any other permit has to be issued? That's my question.
Yes, it does need to be done first. So it can happen, the review can happen while the permit for the building is being reviewed, or they can come in beforehand, even before they submit for the building or whatever development permit they have. So the review time though, and the inspection time that there is before they can start development is geared to happen before the building permit even gets reviewed and issued.
If I could clarify, it's not before the other permits. They can happen concurrently, but before development.
So you're saying it's enveloped into the land planning process.
Yes.
Those 3 months that they've got to check with the neighbors and do all the other due diligence, that's not going to clog up or add any more time to that upfront timeline.
Well, and checking with the neighbors is maybe more of a planning process than the building permit process, but yes, it's all
they're all connected
and concurrent.
Yeah. Okay. And then you said also too in your report that we're going to be processing about 80 permits a month. Is that still accurate?
No. Well, it was, but reducing it down to the MS4 area only is going to significantly reduce the number of permits that we would have to be issuing for erosion.
And really only a handful. We were
yes.
Like 110.
Benton County model? Are we still looking at that?
We have looked at that in the development of our code commission.
Still like it?
Further discussion? I'm still trying to wrestle with the potential impact on the cost of the housing. And not small part based on the time, any additional time it would take to move through the permitting process. But you're assuring us right here that it's not going to add time to the permitting process if we go with the option A. If we look at it.
Right, both options, it would be happening concurrently or before they submit for the building permit or whatever development permit they're doing.
Why are we not required to have sensitive areas? Why can't we get by without it?
Because the DEQ requirements, the MS4 requirements, it's a cookie cutter code. It's basic requirements that are meant to apply to the whole state, the whole country. And so we, knowing our area and knowing the needs of our natural resources, that's why we've added them in. But it's just a kind of one size fits all permit that MS4 general permit is.
But we've gone more restrictive than they require because we think we know better about all of it.
Sure, I would say that we're trying to be more protective to meet the intent of the code of protecting our waterways. So for the TMDL, for example, is needing a more than 90% reduction in mercury coming in through sediment into the waterway. So we're trying to just flag these areas that are known problem areas. And so the city of Springfield has gone above what their minimum requirement is for these sensitive areas because they've found that these areas are higher contributors for sediment onto their roadways, into their waterways, and so they've gone to a higher standard. I anticipate that at some point DEQ will probably require sensitive area protections. They tend to go with a very general approach and then ratchet up over time. But yes, this is above the minimum standard, and that's why we're giving you two options. So to go with that or not.
Wonderful. Thank you for the two options, and thank you for the discussion on this. And I still remain in favor of option B because if DEQ is later going to come with the sensitive area requirements, I'd rather go on their pace at this point in time. Let's go with the least restrictive, and then when more restrictive is required, then let's go with the more restrictive areas as required. Regarding downstream mitigation of excessive runoff, that's a part of how we do business anyway. I don't see any difference really in the way we based upon that, whether we use option A or option B. At this point in time, I'm not sure.
Thank you. I'm pondering whether this is just sort of a thinking out loud. And so if Director Hurley or anyone else on the panel has a response, I don't know that I would consider this, I think restrictive is a word we're throwing around, but it really is just creating contextual to Lane County. I agree often we want to say that we think we know better than DEQ, as the chairman just said, or sometimes we say we do know better. We know our own community, we know the waterways, we know the soil types, we know what we have experienced without these protections in place. So is this really restrictive, or is this simply adding another, again, layer of protection for a natural resource that the entire community generally values, and still allowing the development, just ensuring that it happens in a way that is safest for the natural environment and ultimately a clearer pathway for the person doing the developing because they know what the risks are, rather than taking a chance, having something happen maybe completely out of their control, and then having to do corrective action later, which could be far more expensive than a permit.
Vice Chair, I wouldn't call it restrictive, I would call it protective. That we are not restricting on people building in these areas differently. It's just making sure that they have adequate protections for erosion in doing that development.
Well, I hadn't meant to get into Webster's at this point in time, but restrictive, what I would consider to be restrictive then is anything that impedes something. And if it's being impeded, by more research, more regulation, more permitting, then it's restrictive. So if it's being impeded, then it's more restrictive. And that's my definition. However, you may choose to, if it's causing more expense, or if it's causing more time to be taken. So when I use the term restrictive, if it's not causing more expense, tell me it's not restrictive. If it's not causing more time, tell me it's not more restrictive. Until I hear that, then I'm going to use the term restrictive. So am I using it incorrectly? I mean, it says causing more expense, right? I mean, there's an additional fee that's going to be paid, for instance.
I would call that more expensive.
Very good. Then, but back to the general option A and option B. Everything else is exactly the same. And I want to really commend you on working on definitions in particular and working on some of the other provisions and be very responsive to what the board has asked. For me, I am, once again, I'll state that I am highly concerned about sensitive areas, as is anybody, but I worry about the definition and the application of what are indeed, in fact, sensitive areas. And I prefer to move along at the DEQ's pace on that. So that's why I will remain option B. At this point in time, I guess we can opt with 4 commissioners. We have an option of motions. So, or we have an option of waiting until we have 5 commissioners.
Sure, I think we have sufficient direction from the board, given Commissioner Senega's prior direction of wanting to go with a minimum. I think it's clear that the majority of the board are wanting option B, and so we could come back with that for the next hearing, and then for the following hearing, if that is supported by the majority of the board, then we'll turn to finalize that.
Well, I'm satisfied with that, but we're not all satisfied. So bearing in mind that the discussion is really a matter of not do we want to protect sensitive areas, but at what pace do we want to go ahead of in advance of the DEQ's requirements? At what point do we want to just stay with DEQ's requirements until they have made their determination as to when we need to apply our ordinances to sensitive areas? And that really is what my preference on this. And if we do go forward with option B, with you preparing the manual, is that what we're calling it? And posting it by December 8th, surrounding option B. Now, the sensitive areas, if some change of heart occurred, that's a relatively easy capsule to slip back in, isn't it? It's not woven throughout the options.
We just require another reading.
Yeah. Then what I'm hearing is you'll come forward with the option B and have a manual prepared and put online for review on December 8th.
Sorry, Chair, I just have one question. That you were talking about Webster's, and I still have one question burning in my head that you said. Let me make sure I heard this right. How do we know that sensitive areas are the mercury hotspots? You said that you mentioned, Director, earlier that the sensitive areas tend to be the mercury hotspots that drain most of the river. Did I hear that incorrectly?
Yes, Commissioner, you said that incorrectly. I was saying that sensitive areas are the hotspots for soil erosion, and soil erosion is the largest contributor to mercury. But I'm not saying that sensitive areas are the highest contributor of mercury broadly. There are
just. Do you have any data on that?
So there's smaller acreage, countywide of sensitive areas that are contributing a smaller amount of soil erosion and mercury, but they would be total, but they would be contributing a higher percentage because more soil erodes from those sensitive areas. If that makes sense.
Any studies on that? Any data? I mean, I like that you made the statement. I just want to know if it's true.
I could find studies for that. There's been extensive studying of mercury.
I'll trust you on that then. I don't want you to go doing a lot of homework on my account, but appreciate that. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think before we move forward, it looks like Ms. Surslow perhaps has something to bring forward with us. Did I interpret that correctly?
Possibly. It sounded like the board was going to give a general recommendation or general guidance, and my suggestion would be to follow the motions that we've outlined on the script, which direct the board to make a motion about what specific code version they want brought back.
So that's option A and option B.
I have on the script that I provided,
On the
there's
script.
a couple of options about choosing code option A or B, or continuing the hearing and directing staff to bring back a code with specific revisions.
So the option then would be well, okay. This is the option that we're looking at right here. Then would anyone like to make a motion? I have the options in front of me right here. The option is one that has been outlined, I believe, by. I move to continue the hearing to December 12th, 2023. Time served will continue. Dan, is that right? I mean, you said that you heard what seems to be the temperature of the board in the absence of Commissioner Senegal.
Commissioner Senegal was here. I would think.
And I would think this: if that motion were made, it would fail. Get to vote on either one. I don't know. Does that sound? Okay. So we can move forward with options with the motions if you'd like, but I don't think you're not going to get a resolution based on the motions today.
So, Chair, we could come back to have another hearing and select from those motions when we have all 5 commissioners present.
What's your preference, board? Do we want to go look forward to the motions?
Chair, I would suggest, I agree, we're gonna be split here with just 4 of us today. But I think we need to move forward in order to have enough hearing to continue for the whole erosion hearing and ordinance.
The roads.
The roads. Yes, and we have to start all over, which I would rather not see. So if we can just make a motion to move it forward to the next date, I think that's a minimum motion to continue this going on. And we'll have a majority again. And we can formally make that decision at that time.
That's true.
Chair, I'll move to continue the hearing on this topic to December 12th, 2023 with a 1:30 p.m. time certain.
I'll second that.
Sorry, I'll read it exactly as it is. Move to continue the hearing to December 12th, 2023, 1:30 p.m. time certain for a continued hearing of ordinance 23-06.
Second that better.
Which for your information, I discerned this already. All we did was scratch out on option on the ordinance from the motion that was provided by the source level. Okay, so the motion then is to continue the hearing to December 12th, 2023 at 1:30 time certain for a continued hearing on ordinance 2306. Discussion of the motion. That was moved by Vice Chair Trevor and seconded by Commissioner Lovall. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you. Now, regarding the continued discussion on the next phase of the what do you need from us on that today? Commissioner Buck made a statement that some people said this.
I basically mentioned that I would just work with the watershed that we need to now and do the other one later when it's required.
Then you don't need a motion on that, just it looks like you have concurrence among the board on that particular. Well, thank you very much for this phase of your work today. Along to did we complete that item? There was order 2309-1908. Oh, never
Chair
mind.
Farr? Chair Farr?
Yes.
I am, that order that you just referenced does roll with that ordinance, and I am tracking in the minutes that that order will automatically roll with the motion made by Commissioner Triguis.
I noticed that as soon as I said 08. Thank you, Diana. Then we'll move down the agenda to item 12B, which is a discussion in the matter of vetting the construction of a mixed waste processing facility and increasing fees for solid waste services. And Mr. Moraisky, Director Hurley is the lead of the staff today.
Yeah, and I'm happy to just, I want to make a brief introductory comment while Mr. Erlendini gets set here. These really big initiatives that we work on, for those of us that have been working on it for a long time, sometimes we forget the origins. And for those of us that are newer to the conversation, sometimes we forget the origin. And so I want to just take a moment here as we're nearing a decision by the board. And of course, we're not asking for a decision today, but we'll be back in front of you next week for decision. One, just set the context for sort of how did we get to this place, that this is not an initiative that came out of the blue. And of course, in your packet, you have the history, and a history that goes back almost 10 years, and certainly a lot of work that's happened more recently in the last several years. But I want to just call the board's attention to this item that we're talking about today and that we'll be talking about next week is part of the board's adopted 22 to 24 strategic plan. And it really was a focus on three areas: your vibrant communities, investment in the economy, and the environment efforts. The board's interest in this work has been really focused on economic development via an investment in leading technology and local jobs, in resource management by extending the life of the landfill, and looking at that finite resource and the financial investment the county will ultimately need to make in future years. Of course, we reserve funds in the waste management fund to be able to pay for the expansion of the landfill as waste fills up that landfill. And so there's also this idea of managing resources, both physical land resources and financial resources in the future. And three, the environmental impact, the goal of lowering emissions and diverting waste from the landfill. And so I want to just provide that context. This is a big decision. So we're glad that the board has taken, we've had a lot of these discussions over the last several years, and particularly in the last few months. This is a generational investment if we were to make it. And so I just wanted to set that context again, that a lot of work has gone into this because the board has asked us, your goal, the objective that you set for staff was to fully vet the construction of this type of a facility at the Short Mountain landfill. And so that's what's coming before you today. Dan and Jeff will walk through the presentation again. We're here to answer questions and take additional comments, and then we'll be back again next week when Commissioner Senega is here with you to seek direction from the board.
Steve. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, I'm Dan Hurley, Public Works Director.
We met.
And joined by Jeff Orlandini, our Waste Management Division Manager. And so we've talked a lot about this project over the last year. We were here a couple months ago talking about the vetting status. Again, was your direction to fully vet a waste processing facility. And we're nearing the completion of that. We're trying to complete the vetting of that with this discussion here today and see if there's anything else that you would like us to respond to, look into, so that we can set this up for a decision on December 5th. There are some timelines driving that we need to make a decision on December 5th to be able to move this project forward. And I'll talk more about those as we go along in the presentation. So I'm starting here with a slide of the Glenwood Transfer Station. This was the last major investment of this sort of scale back in 1976. And it was the dream of this facility that it would do waste processing, and that dream was never fully realized. I think the technology just wasn't quite there in the 70s, but it's advanced considerably, and we're very excited with what we can propose today. Again, we'll give a quick project overview. We went through this in significant detail in our last discussion, but there have been some changes in numbers, and Jeff and I will talk about what has driven those, and also some exciting things about the contract negotiation. We've now been able to include the revenues from this contract into that, which has allowed us to be able to reduce the fee increases that we were originally proposing. If you recall, we originally laid out a fee increase plan over a 6-year period, and we said that this would be sort of the worst case scenario of what we would need for the expenses side. Now that we have the revenue side, we're able to reduce that. And there's the potential to continue to reduce that with additional work we'll be doing to try to secure grant money for this project. Last time we talked, you gave us some specific topic areas that you would like us to look into and then report back. So I'll go through those 4 different items listed there. We'll do a wrap up of the vetting status and then talk about next steps. So I'll pass to Jeff for the overview.
So this is very similar to the last time we came, except that the numbers have been adjusted for what essentially is a decrease in waste to be processed based on the way that we collect waste in Lane County, and in particular waste that we could send to the facility. And so we will divert up to 80,000 tons of waste every year from the landfill, removing those organics through that processor before discards are sent to the landfill, extending our landfill life by 20 plus years, and still overachieving on our 63% recovery rate goal that we set some years back. The anaerobic digester will create 1 million diesel gallon equivalent of biogas, and we're going to mitigate landfill methane by over 88,000 tons CO2 equivalent annually. So still a very exciting project. Just, so folks know, our waste stream is almost 300,000 tons a year that go into the landfill. So 80,000 tons of that being diverted is still a very significant amount to us. So the economic impact, you can see the numbers up there. We're still looking at very high numbers to construct this facility, bringing, those local jobs, as well as the 65 ongoing jobs to operate this facility. And again, that's both for the anaerobic digestion portion, the waste processing portion, and the recycling processing portion of this facility. And then it's an over 272 million in increased economic activity as measured by Onward Eugene. So we talked about this before as well. So we've identified and entered into a purchase sale agreement with a parcel in Goshen, which does, for the vast majority of our haulers, slightly reduce that, almost 3.5 miles per trip for them to not have to continue past this facility to go to the landfill and then return. We also believe that it's going to be a faster for them to unload at this facility. So it's actually a positive for haulers in terms of that process. It is a 26-acre property, of which we'll be building on 8 acres of it. And then it's on the next slide, you can see the aerial view of the actual facility, what it would look like right there. And the facility itself is about 120,000 square feet all together on that 8-acre parcel that we'd be building on right there in Goshen. Again, right off of Highway 99, the same route that the haulers are taking now to go to the landfill. And then one major thing that the board asked us to do last time was to do outreach and kind of come back and demonstrate that outreach. And so these are the groups that we've, since our last meeting, I think it was almost 2 months to the day, groups that we've reached out to, the first kind of being our, went right back the week after to our haulers, had a meeting, we had a stakeholder meeting that we normally scheduled, then we had a hauler meeting after to present on this and hear their concerns, and then have followed up with a few of those haulers as we've gone through the process. The main hauler, Sandy Pack, has I know sent in some financial numbers that we can talk about later as well. And so we're really excited to be able to do that. And then also have been, meeting with bulk handling systems to kind of further, refine and negotiate on the details of these contracts, drafts of which we've presented today.
So another report back to us to bring you more details on a financial plan for the project. So the upfront costs are $50 million for the building. The county's portion of that would be $35 million. There are some tax incentives available through this project in partnership with bulk handling systems. And we haven't talked about bulk handling systems yet for folks that are just joining this conversation. We went through a competitive process to select a company that could help us meet these diversion goals in bulk handling systems, which is a local company here with a worldwide reputation for developing these types of projects around the world, is who we're looking at partnering with on this project. So there's some unique tax incentives available for a limited time, some federal stimulus money that we'd like to take advantage of with this project. We would need to start construction by the end of next calendar year, so that's part of the driver for needing a decision on December 5th. The other piece is the property purchase. So we're looking at $1.5 million to purchase that property in Goshen. We signed a purchase and sale agreement a few months ago for that property, and we've done 3 one-month extensions. We're on our last one, and that will expire the second week of December, I believe. So we're up against that as well, needing to make a decision. The other upfront cost won't be on the county side. It will be on bulk handling systems to provide all the equipment that goes inside of the building at an estimated cost of $100 million. The operation, then the ongoing costs, the annual operations cost. So with the proposed contract, and you have that, we just finished up a draft of that on the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving. It's in your packet. We are still working through fine details on that, but it did allow us to bring in some of the big picture numbers of revenue and expense. So with that contract, it would require us to deliver through the haulers 160,000 tons into the facility, and we would pay a processing cost of $83,000 a ton. What did I say? 83. Oh, thank you. $83 per ton, and it would decrease beyond the 160,000 tons by $2. That's not in your contract now. We just negotiated that today. A decreasing amount for tonnage over that minimum threshold. So we're excited to be able to bring that into the contract as well. So the total cost would be $13.2 million. And now the exciting part is that now we've been able to add in the revenues into this conversation. We didn't have that when we first started this conversation, so we laid out kind of worst case scenario based all on expenses. We will have revenues through this arrangement in a few different areas. So the first one is the discards. So the waste will be processed. The parts that can be recycled will be diverted from the waste stream, but there will be the discards, the things that can't be recycled that need to go to the landfill. Bulk handling systems will be paying us for disposing of those discards, and so it'll be a financial incentive for them to minimize the amount of discards coming to the landfill. So we're estimating a $2.4 million revenue on that. Because this facility is really 3 facilities in one. We're talking about a garbage waste processing facility, commingle recycle processing facility, and an anaerobic digester for the digesting the organics that would be pulled out of the waste. Because of that commingle recycling piece of it being housed in this facility, we would receive a host fee estimated at about $1 million per year for hosting that. In the agreement, we have some revenue share pieces for the recycling, the marketing of the commodities that will be separated out through the commingle and through the recyclables that are pulled out of the waste, and also through the renewable natural gas that will be produced by the anaerobic digester. And we're estimating $500,000 from that. We'll also see some cost savings in the amount that we are charged for processing the recycling that we collect at our transfer stations. Right now, we deliver those over to EcoSort. They're transported up to Portland, and we'll be able to have a lower cost for being able to process those recyclables that we collect through our facilities. So the total revenues piece is about $4 million, and so that gets revenues minus expenses, an ongoing cost of $9.2 million. For
Let me start early. We may have a couple of quick questions to interject. Most of the questions will come after the presentation, but for now, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, the 160,000 minimum requirement of tonnage, what's the current? How do we know that number? How do we arrive at that? And if you want to save that for later, but I just thought I'd inject it since we're looking at that number here.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but that's an estimate on the amount of tonnage that would come from compacted garbage haulers. So the challenge, and one reason we reduced our total tonnage coming into the facility, is that the estimates were initially based on our waste composition. So DEQ does studies of what's in our waste. The problem is that some of that waste comes through our transfer stations, which contains big bulky items that can't be processed through this facility at this time. I think that could be improved down the road as we develop more construction demolition processing in our community that could pull out those big bulky items so that we could send more tonnage to be processed through this facility. But it's based on the available tonnage through the hauling companies.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thanks. And the current tonnage, thank you. The current tonnage is about 300,000 tons.
That's per week?
Per
annum?
Per year.
Per year.
So then continuing on to financing plan, the county would intend to bond for the $35 million for the upfront costs for the building, and then we would be paying that back over a period of 25 years. And then we would be proposing tipping fee increases, and we're excited to be able to show you reduced fee increases from what we had proposed originally. If you recall, last time we were here, we talked about kind of a worst case scenario where we would need 4 years of 11% increases and then ramping down, and I think it was 8 and 5%, and that included CPI. We've been able to reduce that because of the revenues coming into this to 4 years of tipping fee increases, with 8% for the IMRF plus 3% CPI, so 2 years at 11, and then 2 years at 9% with an estimated CPI. What we're planning to propose when we come back next week is for the board to approve just the first 2 years so that we will have more information about actual CPI, about actual grant money that comes in, with the hope that we would be able to reduce that further from what we're proposing there with a total 9%. And I'll get to CPI and I think the next slide. The annual tipping fee increases after year 4 would get us back on track with just having an annual CPI increase. And so here's a graph of CPI. Everything in the contract would be tied to CPI. So that processing fee would go up over time as our rates would at the landfill would increase over time according to the CPI. The CPI has been crazy for the last few years. So prior to COVID, we were coming to the board with annual CPI adjustments under 3%. We didn't adjust during COVID. Last year, when prices went sky high, we did a 7% increase to make up for those years we didn't do increases, and we're hoping to get back on track with the regular CPI under 3%. We'd like to give certainty for the haulers around rates. So that's what we're proposing, just kind of a locked in 3% for the next 2 years. And then in the future, we would be looking at actual CPI, and hopefully that would continue to drop so we're getting down below 3%. And I'll pass to Jeff to talk about the impact to households now, what these rate increases would actually mean to the average resident.
So this slide shows for the curbside. We went into this, I think, in depth a couple months ago. One of the positives, if you will, is that on that second bullet point, the 2.2% monthly increase is actually on the high end. And going off the same numbers that Sandy Pack shared, when we're able to go with the updated fee schedule, we're finding that the average ratepayer at the curve after 4 years would see a 6.39 to 8.12 increase. And so that 8.12 over 4 years is about in line with the high end being a 2.2. So for the vast majority of folks that have a 35-gallon can, they're under 2% a year is the impact to them for this fee increase. And so that's something that, while it's still, it's lower than we initially anticipated, and it's, after those 4 years, we're not raising the rates beyond CPI anymore.
And Jeff, really quickly, that percentage that you mentioned, the number that's been commonly used is $2.70. Is that roughly equivalent?
Yeah, so we're thinking it's more like $2.30 on after 4 years, and that's kind of on that low end. So after the 4 years, that's what your monthly rate would go up. And because you have an 11 and 11 and 9, it's not equally spread out, but that's what it would look like after the 4 years for kind of the average customer.
Smooth down.
And then again, thereafter, it would just be our normal CPI increases. And then for the transfer station, that pretty much remains the same, with just the caveat that we are looking to add that $1 off for the SNAP customers. It could prove that, just to give some of our folks that are more financially challenged the opportunity to have another discount when they use a transfer station for their means of disposal. And then commercially, when we look at those numbers, again, the landfill increase at 3.3%, again, is on the high end. And so when we look at the new fee scheme for commercial, it's after 4 years, it's between 8.48% and 13.24. So that 3.3 kind of per year, again, is the high end for the commercial. And we're defining commercial kind of the same way that Sandy Pac did when they sent it in. And so the reason for that disparity, between the 8.48, 13.2 would be, a very small bookstore versus, a larger commercial facility. And so that's why there's a little bit of that spread, but still believe that we've been able to, in working with BHS, bring it down to a more palatable level than originally anticipated. And so I just wanted to reiterate, we did look at other comparator counties, Washington, Marion, Douglas, Deschutes, Multnomah, and Jackson counties. One of those counties, Deschutes, had a lower rate that we could identify it at $94. So that's just about $1 less than we currently charge, although it's more than we charge to the haulers at the landfill right now. And then the next lowest was $107.45 per ton. And so, just wanted to show kind of in comparison to others, we do currently have a really low rate. This would put us on par with some of those after the 4 years, but again, feel like we're getting a lot on the other end there. And lastly, Dan already touched on this, and we talked about it last time, but, we are going to aggressively go after grant funding. The first one, the Swiffer grant, is a big one for us, in the hopes that, if we can find that money, then we can avoid those, we can lower those fee increases in years 3 and 4. So we've already lowered them now a couple points, but we're hoping to get that even lower by getting the grant money. Again, I don't want to overpromise, and so we're showing what we know right now to be the case. If what we know right now is what happened, I'm not going to say that we're going to for sure get grant money, but we're going to go after it, and we think we're going to be really competitive.
Jeff. So another report back was to look at the impact to EPUD and engage with EPUD. You did hear a public comment, General Manager Mr. Roadman, and I do want to appreciate and applaud Mr. Roadman. He, in the last couple of years, has taken, I would say, a renewed interest in this facility, and is looking at investments to this facility that we've been wanting to have for quite some time. I need to give you a little bit of history on our relationship with EPUD. Back in 1989, the board entered into an intergovernmental agreement with EPUD, and it was innovative. EPUD was the first on the West Coast with a landfill gas to energy system. And we were grateful for them to come in and deal with our methane problem. We'd been disposing waste for about 15 years without any sort of with collection. Stories for people that worked back in those days, methane was bubbling up out of puddles and creating a real hazard out there. The problem is, I think we were so excited to get rid of this problem is that we gave away all rights to the gas in perpetuity. We entered into a contract that didn't have termination provisions for us without major penalties. And the permit or the agreement automatically renewed every 10 years without renegotiation. So the board didn't know at that time that gas would become a valuable commodity, and we might want to do other things with it in the future. So in 1989 we did the agreement. In 1991 they purchased their first generators. They are still using those generators. They now have 4. There was, I think, the other 2 were in 93. And so for the last more than 30 years, they've been operating those same generators. We had wanted them to upgrade to more efficient generators back when there was stimulus money in the wake of the Great Recession. There was an opportunity to upgrade the equipment. We tried to negotiate with the former general manager at that time to have more balanced termination provisions, but ultimately they wouldn't agree to amend the agreement. And the problem is they would have then been able to purchase very expensive generators. They could have terminated and taken the equipment with them, and we would still have to pay for the value of the equipment. So it was this double jeopardy that was untenable. So we did not move forward with that. So we continued to operate with the existing equipment that needs to be upgraded. I've heard that their board has given direction to upgrade that equipment, so we're excited to see that they'll be able to put in higher efficiency equipment. In 2017, we started negotiating with EPUD, and it was related to this project, the IMERF that we're talking about today. We gave clear indication that we were moving down this direction to try to divert organics from the facility, mainly with the goodwill of the former general manager, Scott Coe. He understood where we were trying to go and the climate need to do that. Also understood that the old agreement really looked bad for them to kind of have the county handcuffed with this lifetime agreement. And so we negotiated in a 25-year term. So we're 6 years into that 25-year term. So the EPUD sent you a letter last week that had some graphs in it. This is one of those graphs, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about this because it runs a little bit contrary to what was presented to you in the letter and in public comment. So there's a lot going on in this graph, and I'll try to make it simple. So 1991 is when we signed the agreement, and you can see from 1990 up to the present, there's been an increasing potential for recovery with more and more waste disposed at the landfill. There's more and more gas to be captured. So we should be seeing an increase in electric generation over time, but that's not what we've seen, and I'll show you another graph around that. The black line with the dots on it is the flow of methane into the facility. They put in a flow meter in 2010 when they were required to by a permit, and these are actual flow measurements over the last 12 years. And you can see a decreasing amount flowing into the facility where it should be increasing. And you can see that the potential is about 2,000 cubic, what is that? Cubic feet per minute. Help me out, someone. Standard cubic feet per minute. So this is a measure of flow of methane. Thank you, Eric. So the potential is 2,000 SCFM. They've been operating at about 1,000. So that shows that they're getting about a 50% recovery. In fact, it's dipped below a 50% recovery. The letter said that they're achieving a 70% recovery. They're basing that off one data point here. Recently, they drilled in several new wells into some older parts of the landfill and some newer parts, and there was a spike of gas. I would love to see that sustained, but I don't expect that to be sustained. And in fact, what we've seen, I'll show you in the next graph, is that this last read of measurements was back to kind of what we've had for the average. The line continues with the projection, and again, this is a graph that they supplied to us from their consultants. And I'm not trying to disparage EPUD. They've been a terrific partner over the years, but I'm just trying to talk about accuracy in the data. Because we've known that they've been operating at around 50% recovery. Systems like this should be getting at least a 60% recovery. With significant investment, you could get to a 70% recovery on a system like this, but that's not what we've seen over the years. So their consultant projected that if we moved forward with a waste diversion facility, that the amount of gas available would decrease over time, and that's this black line here. And so, the red is the total, the black is what they could be expected to capture with that 70% capture. So if they're able to sustain that, you can see that they would be able to draw as much methane, more than they've been receiving over the last 10 years. So would love to see them continue on that path to get a 70%. And if they do, that it won't be a significant impact of what they've been seeing over the last 10 years. This 2043 line I added that in, that would be the expiration of the contract, or the current IGA with EPUD. So, and continuing on with EPUD, this graph shows their electric generation since the beginning of the project, going back first data point 1992. And so you can see that we haven't seen an increasing trend of electrical production out there. There was this spike last spring, but this summer we're kind of back to where we were for the average there. So what has been portrayed to you is not accurate in my opinion. Of over the last 10 years, there's been increasing recovery, and now achieving a 70% recovery. Moving on to the vetting status, I think we've covered everything that we intended to there for the report back. I would like to talk about a couple pieces on the public comment, and maybe I'll do that before moving to this. So Mr. Donnelly with Sanapac talked about a concern in the contract language about requiring haulers to use the facility and having contracted haulers. The language, we're still working on the language in that. We don't contract with haulers, so we don't have the ability to tell haulers to come to this facility. The intent of that language was haulers that we have control over, and that's only Lane County haulers. So we would be bringing our recyclables to the facility. The topic of regulating the haulers in the county area is something I think the board should weigh in on and have a conversation on in the future. I think there would be benefits to the county for doing that, and to the haulers. We do have cases out in the rural areas where haulers sometimes drop services to people because it's too expensive. And it would be great if we could ensure that people out in the rural areas have some basic levels of service. The other piece is that the smaller haulers, you also heard from Mr. Pelroy from Ecosystems and concern about the rural haulers. We're also concerned about the rural haulers. In fact, we give the rural haulers a kind of a special deal. We let them dispose their collected waste at the nearest transfer site and cover so that they don't have to drive clear to the landfill. So they receive a benefit there that helps to support them and reduces the amount of transportation to the landfill. I would also like to see them protected as businesses. Waste Connections, the parent company of Sanapac, is purchasing smaller haulers in the community. They purchased the two haulers that were operating in the Florence area. And so there are less of the smaller haulers operating. If the board was to consider regulating or franchising haulers in the rural areas, we could do that geographically so that they could have an insured market share for a geographic area. But again, that is not a part of this contract. I'm only bringing it up because it was addressed in public comment about concern for rural haulers. But I think it's a discussion that the board should have at a future point. Right now, we're not talking about flow control. We're not forcing people to use this facility. We think that the economic drivers will handle that on their own by providing a low-cost place for people to bring the haulers to bring their waste and recycling. I think that covered all the public comment. So moving on to the vetting status. So the technical feasibility, we've contracted with a very reputable firm to be able to implement a world-class facility. We've vetted looking at these systems. We've gone down to California to check them out. They're operating effectively. So I think we're set on the technical feasibility as far as vetting. The siting feasibility is almost complete. The only thing we didn't check on there is the zoning compatibility, and that we have looked into this, but it will require additional board action to resolve a zoning issue. We would need to revert the zoning on this parcel back to rural industrial. Right now it's light industrial. It was changed during the rezoning with Goshen. So we would just need to go back to that prior zoning. It was changed to light industrial for the intent of creating more jobs on those parcels, but this project will meet that. And so in conversations with Keir Miller, our land management division manager, his opinion is that this would be a fairly minor thing to do to revert that zoning back to allow this. On the financial feasibility, so we've gone through that with this presentation here, feeling really good about where we're at with the financials and what we're proposing. I just want to back up. I just remembered there was one other public comment around stormwater. Weyerhaeuser is next to the proposed property. They had concerns about stormwater coming off this property and inundating the creek there. Goshen has actually the most restrictive stormwater code in the county. When we went through the Great Plan, we modernized the stormwater code specific to Goshen. And it's the only area in the county where we have code that requires stormwater to be managed on site. So that would resolve this issue of stormwater contributing additional flow into the stream. We analyzed this project through our strategic lenses. Those are analyzed those are laid out in our strategic plan. In your board packet, we talked to each of these. But again, financial sustainability, we have a plan to be able to fund this project for the lifetime and hopefully further beyond the 25-year proposal for the contract. System impact, yes. So you've heard a lot from other entities, the haulers. Waste and recycling are competitive businesses, and there will be impacts to these other stakeholders. I think in the end, Lane County wins in having a local facility with local control and significant economic benefit. The $272 million in anticipated economic development because of this project is a huge impact positive for Lane County. On the equity side of things, again, we think we've kept these rates very low for the household ratepayers, and we've tried to engage with stakeholders along this way to meet their concerns. The haulers have had considerable concerns about how the rates would flow through at the city of Eugene, and fear that they would have to absorb them for a period of time. We're continuing to have conversations with the city of Eugene to make sure that this is as smooth as possible and the haulers are not negatively impacted. Collective impact, again, this is a huge economic development project at a time when the economy may be slowing. So people talk about the timing of this project. I think this is a great time to be investing $150 million into Lane County and our economy, and then again meeting our climate goals. So in summary, I think I've talked about all these pieces. I won't bore you with them again, but this is summary. You can look at those bullets again. I've talked about each one of those, and subject to your questions, this completes the briefing. Except for next steps, we're looking at coming back next week with sort of a bundled proposal for you in one board order that would request tipping fee increases for the next 2 fiscal years at 11%. So that includes the 3% CPI. We'll be bringing a a draft contract. We may still need to make some small adjustments to that, but would like your approval to enter into a contract substantially similar and to purchase the property that we have a PSA on. So that completes it, subject to your questions.
Adjourn. Okay, well, good presentation. There are a few questions that I have, but I'll look at the board for questions and comments.
I always
Commissioner Buck.
try to get us going. I don't really have any specific questions because you've answered most of them for me. But as a comment, I'm extremely excited to hear about the decrease in potential tipping fees that you've already found so far, and that there still are grants that you're actively pursuing that could potentially reduce those further. That's actually a very good thing to hear because nobody wants to increase rates on repairs. It's just not what we, try to get in office to do, right? And so that's really exciting. I do believe that this particular project has gotten the attention at the state level, and I would think that that would give extra competitive feature to those grants. And so that's also quite exciting to hear. I appreciate the comment on an analysis regarding EPUD, since that is largely the district that I represent. And I wanted to ensure that should we move forward with the project, they still have enough capacity to reach their full potential should they do major reinvestments in their equipment. They could still meet the needs and capture energy, and we would have yet still an additional amount available that would feed this project as well. And so that satisfies my concerns about EPUD's role in this. Those are my biggest concerns. I also am glad you were able to talk about the pond next door at the water, because I did have that open question too. I don't want to, after we were talking about erosion control just before this, wanted to ensure that we weren't going to be contributing to any more wastewater in that particular area. Not that I wanted us to do that in any area, but particularly as part of the package of this project. I have met with staff and bulk handling systems specifically about whether we know we can ensure we have enough product at the end that is marketable to the greater economic business factors that they'll be selling to. That one is probably my only remaining reservation, is to ensure that after all the product is separated into materials and packaged, that there's an end market for these, and we're not just doing all that work to land it back in the landfill in the first place. I know that there's really big incentive here for bulk handling to do their due diligence in order to ensure that end market. Otherwise, they're putting out a lot of money that they're not going to be able to recapture to pay for the systems and partnerships that we put together in this plan. But I don't, I don't want to see the effort put in to this facility should we pursue it just to see product revert back into the landfill. So I would like to see, as part of the project, should we move forward, some status reports, and once it's up and running, some reporting back as to what it's producing, how it's producing, what are the returns on the investment that we've made. All contingent on whether this board moves forward, but I think that will be important benchmarks for us to have to ensure to the public that when the rate increases for this particular project, that they're getting some economic development and aftermarket return on that investment. That affects them personally. Thank you.
Thank you. Level.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much you want me to unpack here, Chair. I've got a lot of information that my constituents have got back to me. Springfield, as you know, is a contracted carrier with Sanipac. So they have a lot of concerns about the IMRF. So maybe I should go in rounds. I mean, I'm not sure how much we want to get into this. I've gotten quite a bit of questions that people have forwarded me to ask. One of the main hovering ideas that I keep circling around is this issue isn't about desire or technology, it's business. It's based on market demand. That's really what this whole project's based on. If I was going to put my business hat on and think about it, this is all about market demand. Can it sustain itself? And I keep coming back to, I'm not sure. The question that the first person that asked me is, has this project ever been done on this scale before anywhere on the planet? I already know the answer. It has not. It's been done in 2 phases. Dan, careful here. Talking about San Jose has been done in 2010, was first the digester. 2013 was then the separator. I've been to both those plants. Okay, I've seen them. I've been to Toronto, Canada, been to Austin, Texas, been to Green Bay, been to a lot of these places. So my question is that a project of this scope and this promise has never been done on the planet before. We're a beta tester, are we not?
I would disagree with that, Commissioner.
Well, then you and I are going to disagree on that. Let me continue. So the Marion County right now currently is losing money on their IMRF. They don't have enough waste stream. They're losing money. 8 haulers gambled their dice, and it's not sustainable. So that's a very much smaller project than what we're talking here. The contract that you've laid out too, you said on page 17 of the PDF that we're operating the services and that the county's haulers, contracted haulers, will be required to do waste stream. But then there's a little bit of ambiguity in there for me to say that recyclable materials and contractors and haulers that come on board, so that there's a little bit of wiggle room in there that makes me a little uncomfortable. I understand what you're trying to do, but you also mentioned that if we're going to clean up this language, I think this language needs to be cleaned up fairly soon, because right now to me it's a little nebulous. I've got a few more questions, obviously a lot more. One of the questions someone asked me is the true test of a business is repeat customers. And they asked me how many repeat customers does bulk handling systems have?
So, Commissioner, there's a lot there.
I've got a lot more too, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
I would say, Marion County is not at all a similar facility. It's not an IMRF. It's I see in the construction demolition facility. I would suggest maybe for next week we could have bulk handling here to talk about the markets issue that Commissioner Buck spoke to, about this market demand, about comparable projects, and they could outline the numerous projects that they've completed and repeat customers.
The contacts that you had made that you'd reached out to, and thanks a lot for doing that. Obviously, you've done a lot of work, Dan. I've been to a lot of the meetings you're at. You've been on the road, as they say, a lot. The thing that I wonder as well is the groups you said you reached out to. I noticed that international paper was not on that list. Is there a reason why?
Yes, Commissioner. I don't know that there's a conversation to be had there around. They are not a processing facility in the sense that we're proposing. They are a paper, products facility. The recycling that comes to their facility, they pull out the cardboard and ship the rest off to be processed. We would have a same arrangement with International Paper, with IP, to take the cardboard. They're the likely customer to be able to take this material rather than sending it off. So they just don't do processing. So I don't know that there's a conversation to be had there.
Well, they do separate plastics from cardboard, and they send 25 tons a week to Coffin Creek.
Coffin Butte would be.
Or Coffin Butte, rather, sorry.
That would be landfilling, and hopefully they're not landfilling.
Well, they're separating those two materials. So I'm saying, you're saying they're not a separator, or they are.
But not to the degree. So this facility would would sort through all of the recycling and individually bale all the different types of plastic, the metal, the paper, the cardboard. That's what I mean by true processing, a full processing facility. Their facility is just pulling off cardboard and then sending the rest off to be further processed.
People have a kind of perception too that cardboard's still really recyclable and marketable. Is it?
That's my understanding. I'm not in the business, and again, Bulk Handling can speak to the markets of that, but historically, cardboard and HDPE milk jug plastic have retained value through all the ups and downs of the markets. But that's not my area of expertise, and I would rather have an expert.
Having a conversation with IP like I did for the last couple of days, the market is very low and they're barely hanging on as far as their paper production goes. There's not a lot of demand for cardboard anymore. So I want to put those out there too. We're talking about a lot of potential income from waste stream commodities, and that commodity market is probably at its bottom leg, is what I'm saying. So I just want the public to know that. The question somebody asked me is, what do you do with recyclable products without a market? It's called landfill. I mean, it's Commissioner Buck's point. So
could I speak to that? And because Commissioner Buck has also raised that, I don't know of any recycling that's being landfilled now. There was a period when the markets completely crashed, where up in Portland, the DEQ allowed some limited landfilling of materials that have been processed. But it's against the law to throw away recyclables that have been collected for recycling. If there are things that shouldn't be in the plastics that are not recyclable, like currently the clamshell plastics that are not supposed to be put in the blue bin, but people throw those in, those get landfilled. But the products that are listed as accepted materials, none of those are being landfilled.
All right.
Anywhere in the state, to my knowledge.
Great, thank you. You also mentioned EPUD as a viable partner. What do you think their future is with us? Are we waiting for them to come in and improve their methane capture facilities before we give them preferential treatment, or is this kind of a relationship in the balance? I'm getting kind of a mixed feeling from what you've been saying.
Sure, I see this as two different projects. They have rights to all the waste, the gas coming off the existing waste, and have the potential to continue recovering off that. They have the potential to increase their electric production by upgrading their engines, which they're planning to do. And so they can keep doing that project. They had considered moving away from electric generation to renewable natural gas. And I'm not sure the reason why. I think it's because of their required renewable portfolio standard, where they need to have green power, that they've decided to keep this as an asset. But there's been a trend away from electric generation to renewable natural gas. So they have that as an opportunity. I showed you those graphs. If they maintain a 70%, they will be able to continue on with the same generation potential that they have for the last 30 years.
It is I've gotten a couple phone calls too from major contractors in town. Their concern is that, like you said before, this is going to be a slow construction year. Some of the concerns are, hey, we don't really know where some jobs are coming from. We're hitting a slow spot. We really need this project to keep things viable. Well, that tells me that there's a lot of emotion in this decision, and that concerns me. Like I said before in earlier meetings, being in real estate, as long as I've been, emotion is where you lose money. And so I want to try to educate the public to look at some facts rather than the emotion. Everybody's all on trying to be climate friendly and climate action and do all the things that we're supposed to do and all that. But I think if we just step back and look at this is a very emotional decision. One of the things that came to us from the Eugene Chamber was the 65 jobs that this IMRF is promising ongoing. Are these 65 jobs going to negatively input 65 other jobs that are doing some of the same operations in the county? We're going to be trading some for others. I mean, I'm thinking of Garden Industries on Broadway, who employ a lot of physically and mentally challenged kids. I mean, how does that affect them?
Sure. I don't think there's been an analysis on the net losses of jobs to other competing facilities. I would say those facilities are much smaller. The staff employed at IP for pulling out the cardboard, it's probably a handful of staff, compared to the 65 jobs created. Garden, I anticipate continue using and the jobs here for collecting that material could come to this facility. All that material could come there. So I don't see that that would negatively impact their jobs. And as far as this, being an emotional decision, I don't. I think we've been thoughtful, moving through this over a long period of years, analyzing this, fully vetting this, and it's really, there's a lot of factors on this around economic development, about creating a generation of landfill space for the future. Lots of things that play into this, where I wouldn't categorize it personally as an emotional decision.
The future of trash, as you know, the environmental lobby has been pressing on manufacturers and packaging to minimize their packaging. I remember back in the day, we used to buy laundry detergent with a 5-pound cardboard box, right? And then it turned into an HDPE bottle, right? And so now you go to the store and you see a plastic bag with pods in it that dissolve in your washing machine. So the industry as a whole is reducing its tonnage, if you will. And my concern is, if this has a minimum amount of tonnage and the industry as a whole is reducing that amount of tonnage, in 5 years, where are we going to be as far as what we need to make this profitable? I'm also wondering is if the financials that you have said about the first 2 11s and the 2 9s, after 4 years, are you saying to the public that this machine would be paid for and there would be revenue sources coming out of that? Or how long and how much interest is this machine going to be needing to be served over how much time?
So, Commissioner, to the material piece of it, we have not seen, while different products have gone to different types of packaging, we have not seen a decrease in overall tonnage coming into the landfill. And with our increasing population for the county, I anticipate that we'll continue to see tonnage coming in the cleaning process. But you do speak to the changing landscape of packaged materials. That's a challenge on the disposal end of things, and that's what the Modernization of Recycling Act is trying to get at, where they're called eco-modulated fees that would try to push manufacturers towards packaging products that would be better able to be recycled. So I would actually see more recovery as packaging trends towards being able to be recycled. Right now, manufacturers can make any sort of thing and not think about the end disposal part of it. So they'll have, a plastic that's adhered to a paperboard, and it's just not recyclable. But we could see better forms of packaging.
Level, at the start of when you started asking questions, you made me an offer. You said you could do this in two.
Okay. I'll pause. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the reminder.
At this point, I'm going to invite you to a second round.
Okay, thanks.
Once other commissioners got a chance to talk, and you're asking a lot of substantive questions, and I'm supposing that you have those written as questions that you could perhaps send along to staff, because we're not getting a great deal of time to respond to the very details that are included in your questioning. So is that something you could do? Send the questions to staff, and perhaps along with some of the professionals from bulk handling and other sources, you can get direct answers to us all. Because I'm eager to hear the answer to the questions, quite frankly. So Commissioner Lovell, I'll come back to you in a second round, and to you for now, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. And being mindful of time, because we have one more substantial item on the agenda today, I will just ask a couple of quick questions. One, we're talking about this extending the life of the landfill, which is a great thing we could be doing for future generations and future boards. What is the estimated lifespan of Short Mountain without this project?
Vice Chair, we're talking about a 70-year lifespan left. So we could extend this out to 90 plus years. And while we may not see that in our lifetime, it will matter down the road. When this landfill closes, we'll likely be looking at shipping our waste clear up to Portland and then across the mountains out to Arlington at a huge expense. Likely double what we're paying.
Thank you. And the 65 jobs, I was looking back at the overview economic impact slide because it's significant. One of the things we've had a conversation about that makes that noteworthy is it's not just jobs, but it's a higher degree of professionalism and therefore a higher degree of income. It's a technological job of the future and potentially a place for folks in some of these other smaller operations to aspire to move up to. World. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And the job creation is like approaching 200 for construction. Of course, we heard some really compelling testimony from some local builders and suppliers about how much this project matters to them. So on the economic development side, as far as what the county does and what we are and what we stand for, this project is, as Mr. Mokryski said in his introduction to the item, helps us make good on some of those goals. I love the idea of having bulk handling at the table next time, because I think there are some questions here, particularly sort of touching on what both Commissioners Lovall and Buck raised about the future of the sort of viability of the market. And as you mentioned, the Recycling Modernization Act and the producer responsibility organizations that are paying in that are really going to change. And in my understanding, one of the significant ways they're going to change the landscape of future recoverable recyclables and their value is it's actually going to even that market out. There's going to be fewer wild swings because it's leveling the playing field across the state, because there's this supplement, if you will, of the PROs paying into the cost of doing business of manufacturing products that have a downstream impact that we're trying to manage for. And I just have to trust that an international company has done its projections in such a way that if they are wanting to contribute in the way, gesturing to the slide up there, it's here on my screen, 74% kick in from private industry plus taxes and state incentives, that's probably a pretty good projection. And the last thing I'll say, Commissioner Buck mentioned this project has gotten some attention and interest from our delegation in the state legislature. I would also say on my federal lobbying trip last year, we talked to, at that time, someone working in the EPA and our federal delegation and agencies at the federal level are also really interested and excited in seeing what the future of waste management looks like. So this idea to build a sort of model facility here in our own backyard with a company that lives here in our own backyard, I think there could be opportunity, as Mr. Orlandini mentioned, to get not only grant dollars, but other public investments from the state and potentially the federal. That does lead me to one other question, but I will email it to you in the interest of time and also copy, but I see a partner from Bring Recycling is here, and I do have some questions about the educational aspects of the facility and how that will supplement and amplify Bring's important community education work around waste management. So look for an email about that and maybe be prepared next week to touch on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chair Krueger. And I have a couple of questions. You know, this is a business decision in no small part because we're talking about the product in, product out. We're talking about commodity markets that we're working with. And when we look at a business decision, we look at what do we give up for the benefits that we're receiving. Those are, the old statement, return on the investment. And you did a very good job of identifying the return on the investment on the slides, and it's a wonderful set of slides. It really drills down why we should build a plant, the reasons that we should build a plant. But to balance against that is what are the adverse effects? And there are adverse effects throughout the community. With any business decision we make, there are going to be adverse effects. You mentioned competition, for one thing. The competitors who will suddenly find themselves competing with government will have an adverse effect potentially on their business plan. Competitors who the income derived from their loss of business, the income that they lose from the loss of business to the new facility, the new more efficient facility, new facility that does a better job of sorting and provides a greater benefit for the future, but it affects the business plan. And now we have to take that into account, that some businesses who operate on very, very slim margins, when you take away margin, are no longer going to be able to operate. So there's a possibility that we'll see some businesses in our community who no longer have a viable business plan based upon the competition that's sitting in the market that wasn't there before. Now, you bear that in mind. But I'll take it to when Home Depot came to Eugene. Something I know about. We had a small local company. Home Depot came to Eugene. And what are they going to do with our slice of the pie that we had? Well, what happened was the pie got a lot bigger, and all of a sudden more people were remodeling. So it didn't have a negative effect on the local business. So my question, to balance the effect on businesses who may lose the percentage of the the pie, what's gonna happen with the pie itself? Are we gonna have much more? The answer is yes, of course. I mean, how can we define the amount of the increased amount of product that's going to be going diverted from the landfill and into recycling that's not being diverted today? The pie gets bigger, and even though bulk handling, the plan that they're providing, or that they're planning, is going to demand a great deal of the resource. There's going to be more resource to draw. I hope I said that in a way that you can understand. I don't need an answer to that right now, but that's something to explore as we move down because of the negative effect. Now I'm going to go back to something that's a little bit more simple, and that is the effect of the rates that ultimately will be charged to the people who are putting garbage in the cans. And who puts garbage in the cans? Well, I do, right? I have a 35-gallon can. We just had to switch back a little while ago from pick up every 2 weeks. Now our 35-gallon can gets picked up every week. Hopefully we'll go back to every 2 weeks. But so we're the lowest user, and we're projected at our house by numbers that have been reported. They may be off a little bit, down a little bit, but about 270 a week. Excuse me, 270 a month. 230 is what you say now. And but then my neighbor across the street who has a 65-gallon can, it's more like $5 ish. Then
and that's 4 years from now as well.
Incremental, yes. And then, but then my neighbor down the street who has a bigger family and has one of those huge 90-gallon cans that I put my recyclables into. Well, he has one garbage too. So he's going to be paying like $7.50 or so per month.
So we've just to be clear on the numbers that CentiPack did, usually those are the two sizes that you're talking about, kind of 35 and then the larger, and the larger can, it wouldn't be a double on that, and so it wouldn't be quite that high. They'd be on the higher end of that 270 to the low one would be the 200.
And a point that I have on the home waste, while some homes may not be able to afford it. In fact, it's not a huge percentage increase. $2.70, I mean, probably drop that much change in a month, or my grandkids pilfer that much change out of my change jar. Now that's okay. So, I mean, it's negligible. But as we go up into other types of users, you start looking at pretty big numbers on some. And there are some that I'm concerned about. For instance, with nonprofits. And this is the one that I'm probably the most concerned about, is the sometimes, in some cases, pretty significant increases in monthly fees for nonprofits. What's been reported is upward of $6,000 for large nonprofits. I'm presuming that that's somebody like Food for Lane County, or let's take a Goodwill Industries,
or St. Vincent,
which there's a lot of stuff. So that's this is a rhetorical question. I don't expect you to be able to answer that. How's their business model going to be affected? When they have to pay $6,000 a month more? That is, do the math on that. Was 12 times 6. Why not? It's $36,000 a year. How's that going to affect their business model? And after we've taken that into account, have they had some income? You don't need to answer that right now, unless you got to.
I would like to say one thing. Those total dollar amount changes were based on that worst case scenario 6-year plan. What we're proposing now is 40% less than what was proposed then. So bring those figures down. And I just would like to remind the board that for those entities that align with our mission for reducing waste, so Goodwill, St. Vincent de Paul, we offer a 33.33% discount on their waste, and that could be increased if the board was interested in offsetting.
Then you have thought about this, and you're also projecting numbers that are lower than have been reported. I'm citing numbers that have been reported that have been drawn from a set of data someplace. And so you have thought about that, and that's kind of my question on this: is as we think about this, are we making certain that the people who are going to have their business plans affected are able to demonstrate to us how their business plan is going to be affected, and what can we do to mitigate that? Well, if you say we're going to offer a 33% discount to two of the largest users, which is thrift store processors.
One thing I think we kind of glossed over, but we're also proposing in this a new discount at the transfer stations for low-income residents with SNAP benefits.
Catch that, yeah. And I was going to mention that for the home use, that can be mitigated. Some of the cost of home uses can be mitigated, and we have to do have means to do that. But then as we go down the list, I wonder about other businesses or entities that don't have as much sustainability as far as a flexible revenue stream. So, for instance, we all think about Homes for Good. How many front doors do they have? Each front door has a garbage can. Each garbage can goes into a collection, into collection. And in all of these front doors, which are the lowest income people who have housing in Lane County, who live in Homes for Good facilities, they pay for the garbage. The people who live in the facilities don't pay for the garbage. It's out in the mass. How much is it going to cost Homes for Good? Do we have that analysis?
So, Chair, for the average for all of these commercial businesses, and with the new rates, it's about a 3% increase over each of those 4 years. So, at the end of 4 years, about a 12% increase.
Sure, and increases are the percentage, or you don't put percentage in the bank, you put dollars in the bank. So I'm more interested in what are the costs. So,
Sure, that's just really hard to speak to because of the wide range of garbage produced between all the different types of commercial businesses.
And I'm talking in this instance specifically about our housing, provides housing.
We haven't specifically explored with Homes for Good, we could look at additional discounts to nonprofits. We would just need to work through with the haulers of how we would implement those. Very open to that, but because we don't regulate the haulers, we would need to work out an arrangement of how they would identify those accounts.
Problem. And that's kind of that's what I'm leading toward with this is, are there ways to mitigate the effect on the business plan for not only for-profit businesses who may be operating at pretty slim margins, but also for the nonprofits and for, let's say, schools. The cost to an average high school for a large high school is $500, something like that. But each district 4J has 4 of those high schools and all of the feeder middle schools and all of the feeder grade schools. What's the cost of 4J, and how have we talked to them about how it impacts their business? Because they have a business model. And Bethel and the more mid-sized school district of Springfield, and also Carter Grove City, all of the others that really have relatively small margins, who are struggling to pay teachers, struggling to they don't have librarians. All of the things that we know that they're having to put down. How does this affect their business model? You don't need to answer that right now, but what are we going to do to help mitigate that? And then you've already talked about EPUT. I'm going to digest the information that you've given on EPUT. I had a couple of questions about them, and I'm concerned about EPUT's viability because they are a relatively small utility with a relatively tight margin.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, we have regular meetings with EPUT because they have a facility at the landfill and they operate it. And Mr. Roadman and I, meet a few times a year. We've been meeting regularly as we've talked about potentially their plans to do Northwest Natural. They backed away from that. We've talked about it. My understanding in those conversations is that while this would decrease the potential gas they could capture, it would not mitigate their moving forward with the new generators that they're getting. They still did their assessment and found that they could get enough gas to make that still a viable project. And so, we have been talking with them. That's our understanding. I wasn't surprised that they, would want to push to be able to influence to get more gas. But my understanding is this won't be a deal breaker for their project, and we work with them hand in hand when we're doing landfill development to ensure, hey, okay, we'll help you out. We'll clear this. You can put a well in. So it's still a very positive relationship and one that we want to continue for 25 years.
Thanks for that, Mr. Rowan. I really expected that response, because what I'm driving at right here is that we are looking at a world-class, state-of-the-art facility that really is going to be an eye catcher. Should be developed here in Lane County. People will recognize it. People will notice it. But there's collateral effect. Sometimes I worry about a crippling small businesses and on our education system. It's not a education system, but what are they going to have to give up to pay more in their hauling fees for a district the size of 4J, for instance, which is 500 schools. For high schools, probably I'm guessing that would equate to 48 schools total. So I'm not going to go any further with that. We can talk about that between now and next week. Any information that you want to forward me on that. And same with the other questions that I do have. The last one is regarding the education of the homeowner. People putting stuff in the recyclable can or in the garbage can. We do need to invest in making certain whatever happens next Tuesday, we need to invest in making sure that the homeowners know what recycles and what doesn't, so that entire loads don't get sent to the landfill based upon a small amount of recycle that could have easily been diverted. That's all the questions for me at this point in time. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to that last point, is that not part of the Modernization Act? That there will be a sort of a universal recyclables list statewide? It's another piece that even if people come here from other parts of the state, they'll know that works great.
Or Cottage Grove will be able to put the same plastics in their recycling that we can here that they can't do right now.
Well, I'm on the MWMC Board of Commissioners, and one thing that we educate the customers about what can go down the toilet and what shouldn't go down the toilet. First of all, why it shouldn't go down the toilet. But if we do have a repeated offender on this, it's something that it's practical in the liquid waste system. So I don't know how you don't punish people, but you educate them to help do a better job. With that, I'll go back to Commissioner Lovall. And I know we have our HHS folks who are with us for a presentation I'm really looking forward to. So Commissioner Lovall?
I can be okay with sense to time. I mean, but this is a pretty big issue, so I think we need to spend the time on it. So, Director Hurley, I've been in a number of meetings, like I said, and you keep making a statement about Netflix. So I want to bring that back to the public. You say that Netflix raised their rates $4 and nobody blinked an eye, but I want to challenge that because these simple, small rate increases that you're proposing are cumulatively large over the scale of the county's economy. When Netflix raised their rates $4, they lost 1 million customers the first month. Over the first quarter, they lost $18 billion in overall revenue. So small increments have large effects. And the reason I say that is because Onward Eugene came out with a quote that said that $270 million in positive economic benefit, which is basically $10.8 million a year for 25 years. But they never calculated the negative cost of what the increases of fees would be and all the other things that go with that, what would be the economy. There's been some people that have gotten back to me with cost rates where they anticipated that would be $470 million in negative economic gain from those 65 jobs. The third thing that they asked me too is, are all of those 65 jobs going to be people who actually live in the area? How many of them are going to be remote from Seattle or outlying areas? That's a question they asked. And lastly, or not lastly, I've got two more things. 80% of my district, and Springfield's been on me a lot, so I'm representing what their voices are. So if everybody wants to quote me and tell me I'm the big bad guy in the room, that's fine. I'm voicing the voices of people that have contacted me in my district. 80% of my district is small business, mostly from people who live in the same community. That means that they're going to be hit twice. They're going to be hit with garbage at their business. They're going to be hit with garbage at their homes. So that may not sound like a big deal, but to me, that's a big deal. So I want the public to know that. And then I think the last thing I want to ask is, does this outweigh the leachate line priority? I'm looking at economically, if we can only do one or two things in the next 5 years in Lane County, does this outweigh the leachate line? The reason I ask that is because I talked to someone from Cresswell the other day, and Cresswell, to my understanding, has a sewer line that runs almost right across Short Mountain Landfill from I-5. And the only thing that's stopping Cresswell from becoming a larger, viable economic engine in housing development is the lack of a municipal sewer system. And that if the leachate line was hooked to Short Mountain, that would then open up all of that southern area of Cresswell and Cresswell's city to be more of a building place. And, Commissioner Farr and I have said many, many times that housing. Now, is that going to be the biggest economic driver to the county, or is this facility? So that's my final question. Is this a higher priority than the leachate line? And the benefits that the leachate line would come in at about a third of what this costs.
Commissioner Lovell, I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I think they're both important projects.
You can't do them both at the same time.
Commissioner Lovell, the way this would be funded is through tipping fee increases. The leachate pipeline, that portion was estimated at $6 million for the Short Mountain Park alone. The rest of the project is to be paid by development in Goshen as businesses hook up to that line. There are also different pots of funding for that project. and we're moving that project forward. We're working through the land use parts of it. It's not being held up by this project. So I think that's very important. The connection to Cresswell is a big unknown. While that would definitely benefit Cresswell, there are land use obstacles that we would need to work through to be able to make that happen. There is also the arrangement with MWMC and whether they would want to take Cresswell into their system and have the capacity.
Director Early, I'm going to ask you, let's truncate this at this point in time, and I think that Commissioner Lovell will forward these questions to you for more elaborate response and a little bit more time to think about the response. So we got in the leachate line. I was on the Eugene City Council in 1997 when we rejected that leachate line. It was the Eugene City Council said, no, it's not going to happen because it would blow a hole in the urban growth boundary. It's a statement of time. But that's a long discussion. So we're going to move along to the next item on the agenda after Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. This will be quick. I think I'm very aware of what's happening in Cresswell and their want to hook up to wastewater, since that's part of the district that I represent. I think there may be a misunderstanding that they think the project in Eimer is a competitive project with the leachate pipeline, when in fact they're not competitive projects. They're parallel projects.
And Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County would all have to agree to municipality. In fact, would all have to agree to the leachate line for that matter, but I think it's the handwriting's on the wall. So a lot to talk about. This has been a great presentation, and next week we have an hour scheduled for the discussion next week. We have a little bit of padding around that. So look forward to some of the answers to the questions next week. Look forward to perhaps Bull Handling being at the panel table with us to answer some of the more detailed questions with a few less words sometimes, perhaps. Not that you say a lot of words, but sometimes, you know, when somebody who's a professional in the business, not that you're not, but somebody who knows can condense the responses. Very good. Then Mr. Mokrycki, anything we need to add for this particular item? Looking forward to the discussion next week. And Mr. Miller and Bull Handling, thank you for being here today, listening to what's happening today. And I have a question for Mr. Miller, but I'll ask that next week. All right. Very good. Thank you very much. All right. Then item 13 on our agenda, Mr. Mokrycki, 13A is a discussion in the matter of awarding a contract for stabilization services. And Director Perez with the panel on Mr. Mokrycki. I'll turn it over to you.
The only other thing I wanted to say was just reiterate here, again, we have another item in your strategic plan that's identified in here. And as you said, Chair, really pleased to be back in front of the board to talk about this very critical initiative and project for our community. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I know we've had some audio issues today, so I will try to keep this close. All right, I would like to introduce Evan Olson, who is a PSC, and I don't even remember what that stands for, Program Service Coordinator. Ah, look at that.
Not what it stands for in the Army, but
in admin, and has been working through the details of the RFP on this project. So if you have any questions related to the process on the RFP, Evan is your person. And Brittany DeLiso, whom you all know, who is here to walk us through the stabilization center, the RFP for our provider, and some options for you to consider in terms of how we proceed on this project.
Thank you. So I've been told I have 20 minutes to review this PowerPoint of really complex, nuanced information. So I'm going to do my best, and then we'll have time for discussion after. So I think if you hold your questions, that will be the best game plan here. And diving right in. So we wanted to give a refresher on what actually was included in the RFP. I believe you got a whole slew of materials to review, including the RFP itself. So this is just a quick summary to highlight. We did request that folks apply to either provide services to adults or to youth or to both. And the intention of that was to remain as nimble as possible to move forward with whichever applicants we received that could do so in the quickest fashion. So if somebody could just serve one population, we still wanted to have room to consider working with them. So already right out of the gate, a bit of a unique RFP process there. And the request was for folks to indicate if they could provide interim services. Again, trying to figure out how we could move something more quickly while we preserve our long-term game plan, including the facility build, hashing out the licensing, funding, all of those pieces. And then lastly, of course, actually requesting that somebody demonstrate how they could meet the ongoing operational requirements that we are intending to do. And then I included a little excerpt straight from the RFP just to note the top scoring proposal will be recommended for funding for the services requested. If the top scoring proposal serves only adults or youth, the next highest scoring proposal for services to the unserved population may also be recommended. And that is just a precursor to the unique options we're bringing to you of possibly moving forward with one or two different providers. So we also wanted to give a picture, and some of this is redundant even from when we were with you earlier this month, but really wanted to put it in front of you in this context of some of the elements we're navigating around our timeline and our funding that we are holding as we pursue decision making around who our provider is and how we will operate the services. So one piece that we've brought to you many times, but again, to refresh you and remind you kind of where this number and estimation comes from. So we're anticipating a roughly $5 million operational funding gap each year. It starts higher and then reduces year over year to kind of sit at that $5 million number. Again, that's our team's best guess, looking at what we know to be reimbursable and what those current reimbursement rates are, looking at Medicaid reimbursement rates, and then also the understanding or expectation that approximately 70% of who we might serve would be providing or would be served by Medicaid, and then the other 30% a combination of Medicare, commercial, and uninsured. And as a reminder as well, with Medicare and commercial, currently they do not cover any of the behavioral health crisis services that we intend to provide. And we do know that the numbers that we are looking at we anticipate those will be further specified by the provider, who will know the work and know what they bill and how to bill it more intimately than we do. So we are anxious to get the provider on board and get some clarity there. Implications of this reality, this funding reality, and the other pieces that we're balancing is that we are working to give OHA room, Oregon Health Authority room, for their Medicaid analyst to really assess the current reimbursement rates, and that's on their docket to do, that we've been told, but they are currently in the middle of assessing, evaluating the mobile crisis reimbursement rates, which is just as pressing a priority as we're looking at the full crisis continuum of services. And they have the one person that does this type of Medicaid analysis, rate analysis. And so we are giving room for that person to analyze how those rates might be adjusted to possibly compensate for crisis services through Medicaid differently. And then we are also looking at how these decisions might be, funding decisions might play out within the upcoming short and long session. And was just in a meeting this morning, actually, with representatives from Oregon Health Authority who gave a loose plan to first look closer at some of the rule sets, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and we've talked about with you all here, that may need to be adjusted, and then allow any of those adjustments to inform a POP that they would bring to the 2025 session. So that's the best information that we have with OHA's intended plan around bringing funding asks to the legislature that would then impact us. And I asked in the meeting today, what do we do in the meantime? Which brings me to the third point of the strategies that we are trying to implement with this reality and the framework that we've been given. So one is we are pursuing these this provider contract before services would be delivered so that they can come on board and support us with program development, community engagement, licensing and credentialing, actually fundraising, and some of the facility design. That was all intended to happen before doors open, but advised by those providers. And we have applied and secured grant funding from Trillium Community Health Plan to help pay for those services, since they will certainly not be bringing in any revenue, since doors will not be open yet. So continually, daily looking at potential grant opportunities, but that was a specific grant allocated to be mindful of the upcoming costs. And we are preparing for next year to really become more intentional with a local funding initiative along the lines of an informational campaign, kind of bringing this topic back to the minds of the community members and understanding where and how community members might participate in bringing this service online to our neighbors. And that is also by direction from Oregon Health Authority that whatever amount they might contribute, they are looking for communities to help fund this service as well. So we're trying to do our part in informing our community members, constituents, our own neighbors to understand, even on a micro funding campaign level, how folks can contribute to capital costs primarily for this work. And then regarding operational costs, that's continued ongoing conversations with Oregon Health Authority, as I referenced this morning, with our CCOs who are a part of our executive steering committee and often at the table with us, and with DHS, and getting creative about other potential operational funding partners. All right, here's a whole lot of words, but in our RFP, we did reference the SAMHSA National Guidelines for Behavioral Health Crisis Care. And so I wanted to put a few elements of that in front of you that felt relevant to this conversation, and how those compare to our two providers that are applicants to the RFP. So a quick snapshot of what SAMHSA has defined as minimum requirements for behavioral health crisis care includes that an organization accepts all referrals, that an organization would not require medical clearance prior to admission, that they would design their services to address mental health and substance use issues, they would assess physical health needs, deliver care for most minor physical health challenges with an avenue to access greater care, would be staffed 24/7 with a multidisciplinary team, would offer walk-in and first responder drop-off options, offer capacity to accept all referrals at least 90% of the time, the no rejection policy, screening for suicide risk, and screening for violence risk. Hopefully many of these elements sound familiar to you as aspects of the program planning that we've brought to you already, because much of our program plan is informed by SAMHSA's guidelines. So we just wanted a comparison of, based on what the two applicants included in their application, the elements of these guidelines that they can deliver. That said, we did not explicitly say, can you meet each one of SAMHSA's best or minimum required guidelines? We just referenced this is the best practice that we would like you to adhere to. So just to call out, pretty much both of them indicated that they could meet all of those. The goldenrod check marks up there, accepting all referrals. Looking Glass is proposing that they would just serve youth. So technically they would not accept all referrals based on kind of the age limit. So that's the technicality there. And then for the medical clearance prior to admission, Connections did indicate that they could do this. Looking Glass did not, but part of that is because this is not yet, to our understanding, permissible in Oregon. And so Connections likely indicated they could do this based on what they've done in other states. Looking Glass is aware of those Oregon limitations. And that's an area that our team would go with the provider back to the state to really tease out and understand, and again, identify if this is a rule set that would need to be adjusted or not. Not looking at any of my notes that were key items to tell you, so I'm making sure that I'm covering everything. Another slide with a lot of words that I'm not going to read to you, but I wanted to highlight, and I know you all have access to this, zooming out, SAMHSA in their crisis system requirements and recommendations, best practice, they highlight other elements other than just the crisis receiving centers other than just 988 and other than just mobile crisis. One of the elements that's really pertinent to today's conversation and some of the options we're presenting to you is the role that short-term residential facilities play in the crisis continuum. And so SAMHSA calls this out as well. Really in being a resource to send someone once they have navigated their immediate acute crisis, having somewhere for them to go, which is a big question we've gotten throughout our planning, and there's a lot of work to be done there, but they're reiterating that having facilities such as residential treatment facilities, psychiatric residential treatment facilities is a key part of the crisis continuum. And that's a little teaser for what's coming, but wanted to plant that seed for y'all. So looking at the actual RFP results, and I just wanted to give a disclaimer that typically we would just be bringing forward the applicant that was awarded the highest score in the RFP process through our review committee. But recognizing the request that we have heard from you all to find a more immediate option if it exists, we wanted to bring both applicants to you, knowing that the applicant that was selected via the highest score did not have the shortest turnaround time in being able to deliver services. So that's really a main reason why we're bringing this in this kind of unique fashion. And I wanted to highlight what's up here are the items that each of the applicants scored higher in, but there were 11 different questions or elements, and up here, this has 5 of them, because 6 of the remaining questions, which I'll reference here, had a score differential of 4 or less points. So it was really, really close, is my point. And what's up here, I only included the aspects that had 5 or more point differential between the 2 applicants, because that seemed worthwhile. So Connections scored higher with their proposed population served, and that's because they are proposing to serve both youth and adults. They scored higher in their experience or ability to provide crisis stabilization services based on experience in other states currently providing the service, and their experience or ability to complete capital project planning, which they've also done in various other facilities that they operate in other states. And then they scored higher with their anticipated project budget. And we're going to take some time to look intentionally at each budget. And then Looking Glass scored higher in their ability to provide interim crisis services. And they really, Connections said that they were willing, but they didn't necessarily have an option to do anything immediate, whereas Looking Glass has a facility that could be turned into something that could fulfill the interim requirements, was what their proposal stated. Some of the items that they scored really closely on that are not on the screen is their experience and approach in providing trauma-informed evidence-based practice, accessibility of services, considering all different types of impairments and needs, securing and maintaining workforce with a plan to do so, and the ability to provide multidisciplinary staffing, developing and maintaining community partnerships, prioritizing and incorporating consumer voice, and then the plans for licensing and credentialing with the state. Again, all of those are within 3 to 4 points in their scores. So that was all the background, and this is the actual options that we're bringing to you today. We're going to do a deep dive into all 3 of these, but just wanted to put them in front of you to have a framework of where we're going. Option 1 would be to award the applicant that scored the highest and that the RFP review committee has recommended, which is Connections. Option 2 would be to award both providers, and that would be awarding Connections with the adult services, and would be awarding Looking Glass for interim youth services, with plans to evaluate and negotiate what would happen for ongoing long-term youth services once the interim period is over. And option 3 is to start over and initiate a new RFP. So digging into option 1, we do have the option and then some considerations for you all to keep in mind. And I have a little carve out that I didn't reference when I gave the high level overview. So option 1, just moving forward with just Connections, includes a caveat because our intention are that the empty beds that the Looking Glass facility currently holds that we would want to fill those in one way or another and bring them online in some fashion, and the sooner the better. The question is, does that fit within the intention for this project, or do we have some other ways that we can supplement and support them to still bring those beds online, provide some immediate relief to our system while still pursuing our long-term goal? So the way to do that here would be awarding connections and then providing support and advocacy for Looking Glass to operate psychiatric residential treatment facility or treatment services beds, PRTS, which is what I was kind of alluding to when I was highlighting that part of the crisis continuum that SAMHSA calls out of the short-term residential service that a youth could transition into once they've stabilized in their crisis state. So we could bring on, and to note, Looking Glass does already provide PRTS services in the community in some of their other programs. This would be adding more beds. A couple things to note too about connections specifically, just to help you all locate them in your minds if you haven't already, that Dr. Balfour, if you remember viewing a presentation that she did a couple years ago, her work with connections was actually really what honed this project and the vision for what we've been trying to do. That's one and the same with this organization. And their timeline and what they have proposed to do does align with our full-scale project aiming towards 2025-ish based on outcome of maybe that long session. And so they would be coming alongside, as we had planned initially, for advice and counsel around the licensing, credentialing, operational costs. They would be going to OHA with us, or even just them directly, to tease out some of the unknowns that we're facing because this is innovative work. And they, as I've referenced, are doing this work successfully in other states. We did get to go tour a facility in Arizona. I believe Washington State is in the midst, and that was actually one of their letters of support was from King County, maybe King County. Oh, everyone's giving me blank stares, but someone in Washington that they're currently working with and have a few other endeavors in a few other states. So could advise on that. They did actually directly advise SAMHSA on their best practice as well and the guidelines that we were referencing. Kind of the con, if you will, is that this does not include interim stabilization center services, nothing immediate when it comes to direct stabilization center. More of the sooner turnaround time is on increasing those PRTS beds would be the goal.
Brittany, I know we're super tight on time, but I do want to point out with this option, the option is to advocate with the state, and there is a ton of support from the state in terms of us coming with solid asks and meeting with the head of OHA and including the director of Medicaid and the director of behavioral health, and really coming to some support around organizations opening more beds. And this would involve DHS also in terms of Looking Glass, because the youth side is funded by both departments. But we would not in this recommendation be financially backing the sustainability of those Looking Glass beds. We would be advocates, but we would not be committing our dollars to keep those beds open. That differs in the next model, and I think is a really important point to just call out. And Brittany will be talking about specifically what those numbers look like in terms of the potential financial backing. And of course, what you heard from both providers this morning, we have done extensive work with both providers before coming here in public session and bringing these two options. They are both supportive of both options. So just bringing that forward as well.
And just to note on PRTS beds, the services are paid for by CCOs for Medicaid members primarily. And one piece just to highlight the distinction of PRTS beds, psychiatric residential treatment services, and stabilization center youth beds. You know, why do we need both? Aside from the fact that we just need more of everything. So that's always going to be the case. So the PRTS beds provide longer term care. Stabilization center would be that more immediate, acute, 3 to 7 days, maybe up to 14 as needed, and then being able to hand that to the PRTS facility. And also the benefit of being able to build and construct our own space is that we could allow services for all age youth. So currently, serving youth is quite segmented, and that would probably still be the case, but we could construct a facility that could accommodate that, so that we could actually serve early childhood all the way up through transition aged youth in our facility. Other things just to note in pursuing one provider for all of the services, for the actual stabilization services, and pursuing our new build, having co-located services would allow us to serve the entire family. We talked about this a little bit earlier this month with you all. Would allow for the campus of connections, physical space for nonprofits and other agencies to come provide actual physical warm handoffs for discharge planning, the ability to build a sally port and really be more accommodating for our law enforcement partners, and then the ability to have a separate designated space for intake and receiving, where folks can be assessed and triaged to see if they need to be staying there or if they need to be transitioning elsewhere. And the current option with Looking Glass with their facility, it's a little uncertain still on how there's some ideas, but how they would accommodate both an intake element, intake space, and the longer term services as stabilization center if they use that building for that rather than PRTS. Okay. I probably already over time, but keep us moving here. So option 2, this is awarding contracts to both. And just again, a shout out, this would be awarding connections with the adult program. And then the youth program would be provided on an interim basis by Looking Glass, potentially for Looking Glass to continue to operate that long-term in a close partnership with Connections, or for Connections to absorb the youth program once that interim period is complete. I have a long list of considerations because this is probably our most nuanced option. So the pros is that it does provide some of that interim direct stabilization center service, as well as ongoing. As I mentioned, providers, could be both providers working. It really would require a unique amount of partnership between the two organizations, even in 2 different facilities, just knowing that the cutoff age would, get tricky on how folks would be navigated there and transitions. There's a potential compromise of the SAMHSA model and what our local system needs, which we believe is really the full under one roof or under 2 close proximity roofs of youth and adults, and being able to take advantage of shared staffing and all the things we brought to you before. And then there is nuance in serving multiple family members, transition age youth. And if we do have to have part of the service in one facility and then perhaps a youth has to be walked across the parking lot to the other facility, the reality of stigma that may be involved there and safety. And really it's complicated to have the services in 2 separate spaces by 2 different providers, but it's possible. And then financial considerations, which we have whole slide or 2 dedicated to this, but wanted to bring this forward. This would include paying 2 different providers for this pre-service delivery planning period that we have discussed, and then a potential loss of the economy of scale and shared staffing, thinking of admin staff, and really in particular the medical director and psychiatric staff, which is hard to come by, and the chance for that to be shared if it's a shared program. And then it does, with interim services provided, we get services right away, but then it comes with a financial requirement to cover that operational gap right away without the time to kind of build a plan in partnership with the state to address that gap. And then option 3 is initiating a new request for proposals. This is our only point where we're coming forward with a clear recommendation or not, saying we don't recommend this option. There's certainly the risk that neither of these applicants would reapply and that we wouldn't get any other quality applicants. We did distribute this RFP uniquely, widely I tried to do the math, and it was between 250 and 300 folks that we sent this to, and we got the 2 applicants. And as a reminder of what I shared with you earlier this month, our neighbors up north in the Gorge area had providers on board and lost them because they pulled out due to workforce. So it's really special that we got 2 applicants, in my personal opinion. And then certainly it would impact our timeline to have to start over. All right, so as promised, the budget details. So this is back to option 1, and this is pulling from Connections proposed budget, since option 1 is moving forward with the contract with Connections. So Connections has estimated that their pre-service delivery planning in their proposal would cost $3.1 million to cover the span of 2 years, which was the time frame that we proposed for how long the pre-service planning might take place. That can certainly be adjusted as we get moving. And they mentioned that this would cover program management staff, operating costs, and then their plan includes bringing full clinical staff on, maybe not full, but clinical staff on 30 to 90 days prior to operation for training purposes. So that's paying for clinical staff for 30 to 90 days before they're providing any reimbursable services. So that's part of what's included in their proposal. Their operational funding model is a value-based payment model, which is certainly an umbrella term, but essentially meaning they would not rely on fee-for-service, but more performance-based payments. And there's multiple ways to do that. And so they, from our understanding, left that open based on payer preference and what they would contract with each payer source, primarily Medicaid. But that's a heavy emphasis on key performance indicators and outcomes, and can be adjusted with the payer as well. But there's kind of some flexibility there. And they provided a proposed annual operational gap of 4.5 million. So again, our estimates around the 5 million, and that's for all 3 units, I should say, the 2 adult units and the youth unit as well. And some considerations on this slide, which apply to both the proposed budgets. I just had room for it on this slide. One is to note what I already shared. We secured that Trillium grant. So the grant that we got to cover the pre-service delivery planning is $922,000, which is not 3.1 million, but it is a start and could give us room knowing that that's over a 2-year span. And certainly that 3 million for both providers could be negotiated in contracts based on FTE that the county can put forward and other aspects of what we're really purchasing from them. Also, just to note, there is, as I've said, there's not currently a mechanism in place for Oregon, in Oregon, to adequately bill for all the services that we intend to provide, which we've shared with you many times. And then to note that Connections in their proposal included that they could bring on additional support to consult on potential funding, really getting creative around closing some of those gaps with some of their other work, and then the consulting firm that they contract with directly around these issues. And then lastly, the asterisk is to think back to our timeline. So that 4.5 million, we could close that gap. Is that me? Thank you. That's exciting. We could close that gap in our conversations and dialogue with the state, with the CCOs and local funders.
And also just very quickly, we also have the $1 million that this board allocated toward pre-service planning. We don't have all of that still, but there is still some proportion that we could put toward the pre-service delivery planning.
Okay, so the proposed budget details for option 2, I have the Connections details up there. Those are the same. I will not rehash those, but this is basically paying for Looking Glass and Connections combined. And so if we parse out the proposed budget that Looking Glass includes, and I'll give a caveat if you all had time to review their proposal, they reference additional services, including 988 and mobile crisis, which is not a part of the RFP. So we did have some conversation around if we weren't including that, how would that adjust your budget? So there's a lower number here based on what they would anticipate as what could be reimbursed through billing, and then also removing 988 and mobile crisis from their budget line. So their pre-service delivery planning, they estimated at 1.3 million, which is for 6 months. And that includes program management staff, training, recruitment, materials, and then some renovations on that existing building that we've referenced. Their operational funding model is a little bit more specific type of value-based payment, and that's capacity payment, essentially where the county and possibly DHS, which they have this arrangement with DHS for other programs, to my understanding, pays up front. And then Looking Glass is able to collect what they can through fee-for-service and other billing, and then can reimburse the initial investment from the county and or DHS. So this, of course, would require the county to be able to pay up front for these services, and those are estimated based on their operational estimated costs, which they lined out. And that still would leave a 3.75 million operational gap, which they did not provide the annual gap. They provided year one gap. So I want to call out that they just approached those differently. So theirs is for just year one for the youth unit only. And just to spell out, because these are a lot of numbers on the board, they aren't all at once. So they're very primitive timeline here at the bottom. So the pre-service delivery planning costs in this option for both providers, roughly 4.2 million before contract negotiations, that would be paid out in year 1 and 2. Operational costs for Looking Glass would also be paid out in year 1 because they'd be getting stood up quickly. And then operational costs with an asterisk, thinking maybe we can close that gap again in our state legislative advocacy, would be year 2 and 3. So these are the same details just in front of us, and I'm finished. And leaving this slide up here for us to reference as we discuss. You have any other things to add?
Great job. I did not give you nearly enough time, so that's totally my fault. I will take accountability for that. But we would love to hear questions about the options presented.
Excellent. And I'm prepared to ask questions, but in the 22 or so minutes that we have, we can go longer if we need to, but I don't think anybody particularly wants to. But in the period of time that we have, what would you like to get? What's the final thing you would like to hear from us today? What's the final instruction of the leader?
You have 2 board orders in front of you. In an ideal world, you would select one of them. As we intentionally did not come in with a staff recommendation, though we are open about saying that under a normal process, option 1 is the option that we would have brought forward for a standard just order and resolution for awarding a contract, and that is because that was the highest scoring provider. But again, it doesn't take into account that nuance of the timeline, which also just requires us to think about how we would finance that. The level of risk that we would take, because we don't have dollars assigned today for operating the Looking Glass beds, is that we would be counting on finding funding in order to help support our local commitment. But we would, of course, have to back that with general fund, since I don't have any discretionary funds in Health and Human Services that I could apply to that particular gap.
We have the alternatives in front of us. It's actually a third, but I think we've discounted the third.
Well, yeah, we would hope so.
So we'll start with questions. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation and for hanging in with us this late hour. I'll start with the easy one. I'm not in support of option 3. I see no reason to start all over.
Clarify.
Let's get it right out there so everybody can take it. Just one commissioner, though. I am fully in support of option 1 for a number of reasons, many of which are really just sort of recapping what Brittany just presented to us. They have experience with the model, first and foremost. It's so innovative that the feds haven't even caught up with how to reimburse for these programs, and they yet have managed to stand up and fully run facilities doing exactly this work. And I think benefiting from their expertise would be terrific for us here locally. I think it helps keep our long-term rigor to our long-term vision and the goals that we have set out for this project. Keeps that intact, keeps forward momentum going, reduces the liability or dissolution of the dilution of resources. It is hard not to say yes to something that gets us services more quickly, especially to some of our most vulnerable constituents with the youth. Excuse me, but as you mentioned, we need so much more than just the stabilization center or just more psychiatric treatment beds for youth and for all ages. And so keeping that longer term vision intact and not be lured into that quick short term fix, I think is really the responsible and important thing to do. And I love the added piece of advocating alongside Looking Glass to get them the resources to deliver those services is great. I also was thinking, I did quite a bit of research of connections online last night just to see who is this company, and read all through, and then just sort of followed some reviews and other websites connected to some of their leadership and their board. And it occurred to me this is sort of a similar situation we're into when we opened River Avenue Navigation Center, and we had the opportunity. There was some discussion and tension about bringing a private corporate service deliverer into the community, but I think that also increases the capacity in the community overall. It brings a new, fresh set of eyes to the community, and we know our nonprofits are so stressed and strained with the need already. So to have an opportunity to do that, I think is really valuable, particularly with this content expertise. I'm not really in favor of the splitting of trying to share and sort of straddle the two organizations. I just don't think fiscally it makes sense. I don't think ultimately the future gets us the best result. So I just have two quick questions. One is, it seems the appeal of option 2 is we get the interim services out of Looking Glass, and they're only able to provide it because they have a physical space. If we went with option 1 and somewhere down the line a physical site were identified, is Connections nimble? Is there an opportunity for them to step into providing interim services? Do we know that?
They did indicate that they could provide services earlier if we could provide a site earlier.
Great. And then my only other question, after we hear from other folks, if we're ready, I could make the motion about option 1, would be whether we need an official assignment to sort of codify that piece of working in concert with Looking Glass to do the advocacy around funding for their PRTS beds, or whether that's just part of your operations and what you would be doing in behavioral health and H&HS anyway.
It's part of the option that you'd be voting on, so I feel comfortable. And staff would do that anyway. We need these beds.
I figured. I was just looking at the order and it wasn't named in the order, so that's why I was asking. Okay, terrific. That's all I have to share.
Thank you, Chair. I also feel tugged in both directions. My question is specific to option 2. Should we do both? I realize that there's a higher cost because we do have 2 different programs, different overhead, different facilities. But there's also additional costs because you're opening it earlier than anticipated. So there's operational money trying to go out the door earlier than normal. In an ideal, quote unquote, ideal situation. My question is, we haven't identified the funding for it. And you mentioned because there isn't any identified money to start as soon as possible, it would need to tap the general fund. And so then I look at you, administrator, and say, okay, if we're tapping the general fund, what other service, at what expense to another service will that money come from? Especially when we're trying to support public safety system and we have needs in every department for staffing and services and our laundry list of strategic initiatives. So it's basically a fiscal question.
Yes, the answer is we don't have available resources. At the end of last year's budget process, we were projecting, after closing about a $4 million gap, we were projecting another $3 million, because if you remember the beginning of the budget process. The general fund, we said we had about a $7 million structural imbalance. We closed $3.5–4 million of that. So our goal is to close the balance in the second year, which is next fiscal year. So it's beginning in January, really. We have our leadership team meeting with the board and executive leaders in the organization will have that conversation. So we have what we were projecting then would be a $3 million deficit in the general fund. We're negotiating, I think, with 3 of our bargaining units next year. So there's the uncertainty about those potential cost increases, and then this is an unexpected cost. So I mean, it's not the answer I think any of us want. We'd love to have the resources to be able to invest in this today, but we don't. So yes, it would require. You could either dip into reserves, but this is an ongoing annual operation, and so you can't fund it 1 year and then be done. You have to have an ongoing funding source for it, which I think is why the team has really leaned into option one because it gives us the ability to go to the state with a plan, right? With a provider and a plan to say, okay, we got a plan. And my sense is that's what the state agencies and administration, legislature are looking for is they don't want just an ask, a hypothetical ask. They want to know, do you have actually a plan in place? So that's why we've leaned more into that.
Thank you. I think that answer is what I anticipated. But for me, that also pulls option 2 off the table. It's just not an option if we don't have the funding for it.
Right. I think in fairness, it could be seen as a one-time investment in terms of reserves if we are arguing that we believe in the 2025 long session, the state's going to come through with some additional funding. So that would support either or both of the providers. So I think it's just important to put that out there, but there's no guarantee on any of these conversations. And the way that the RFP was written was to say pre-service planning, and then if funding is identified, becoming the service provider, because we know that there's that big question mark. So it's a matter, it's how much of a gamble and when to take the gamble. And we'll be coming back to you to talk about this with the start of the construction too. How much of a gamble and when to take that gamble, because we are really out on the cutting edge in this state in terms of the level and the quality and the class of the facility that we're putting together. So there will be some risk in this, but this is one of those questions for you.
I appreciate that. It's completely hypothetical. I don't want to bind us into a contract with providers that we know we don't have the funding for. I want to be more fiscally responsible than that. Not that I don't want to have these beds as soon as humanly possible. I do desperately. But option 2 right now for me is not actually an option. So because of that reason, I think the default option is for option number 1. Thank you, Chair.
Well,
Thank you, Chair. Wow, that was painful. I'm feeling everyone's pain. And, obviously when we start talking about not having the money and where we're going to get it and what pants pocket we're pulling out of, option 3 seems to be the best option, doesn't it, Brittany? This was kind of like my dog in the fight. I really wanted to get some youth services on the plate. I looked at that site with Craig Opperman. We talked about it. We budgeted. We visioned. And here we are without any money. And that really frustrates me. So before hearing all the considerations with my colleagues, option 2 would have been one I would have been leaning toward. But I don't know. I mean, we've got to do something. I mean, the question I had here that was kind of the fire in my belly was 2 things. Was, what is our current differential in suicide rates between adults and youth? Is that an important marker for us to educate the public on, to say, hey, we don't have the money, but we got to find a community and we got to do it for the youth, because I'm one of those people that experience youth suicide and it sucks. Okay. And I don't want to look a family in the face and let them know that, oh, well, we're going to wait for option 1 and 6 years down the road, we're going to try to build a $30 million building that we don't know how we're going to pay for yet anyway. If we find a facility for option 1, I mean, there's real estate out there, but it's all 23 million, 25 million. I've sent Eve listings from LoopNet. So we have those same challenges. We either gamble now or we're going to gamble larger later. So what gamble do we want to take? I guess that's really the question that I'm laying out. And right now, I've gambled a lot in my life. I think I would gamble on the youth. I think I would pick option 2. I'd try to find a make it work. Plead to businesses and community partners and say, if we don't do this in 5 years, we may not know where we're going to be. So, and I hate to say that's an emotional response, because I'm always one up here saying, emotional responses cost you money. But, dang it, it's also a factual response. If we don't do something for the youth in a number of years, we're going to be in a really hard place. Thanks.
Option 2 it is. Actually, that's my preferred option also, is option 2. But with a caveat that there's a chance that moving forward in that direction we will stall. And programs that they're not sustainable. I don't necessarily trust the Oregon legislature. And I say that through experience. You know, but that being said, they do the best they can do with what they have. There's no question about that. But what I don't trust is that they're going to have enough to spread around the way that. So I don't think we can count. Which means that my choice of option 2 really has a big asterisk by it. You know, I don't think we could do option 2. It's not right. You pointed out the probability of us being able to pull apples off the tree. Find $3 million, 3.75. You know, and that's just for 6 months, right? That's for the first 6 months.
The 3.75 is the annual operational gap that Looking Glass is anticipating based on what would not be reimbursed. And then it would be the 3.1 plus 1.3 and the 3.1 we could probably negotiate some if it doesn't involve youth. But there would be increased cost to the pre-service delivery planning.
Well, that being said, you know, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go along with option 1 also. That really is gut wrenching to do that because was it 3 months ago when we were talking about this? We said go forward full steam with youth, and here we are doing kind of an about face on that, simply because, and I'm going to lean on some of the words that Vice Chair Krieger said, the connections as experience. I've been in that facility in Beaver County from the other side, not looking at it from the provider, but looking at it from the patient side. And they really, they do a good job. They know what they're doing, and they are evolving on an ongoing basis. So I really have high confidence in them. But I guess I'm hoping that Looking Glass can continue to be a part of the big picture, because they have the facility, they have the tremendous depth of expertise, absolutely spot on locally. They know what is happening here in our community. They have been. Craig Hoffman this morning. He's ready. He's retired. He's still active. I said that earlier, but he's ready to, and I believe that's for to do what they can to supplement, augment whatever need be with correct. So.
Can I chime in just 1 second on that too? Looking Glass is a part of our executive steering committee for the Stabilization Center. So not only are they a great partner and well suited, but they are committed to the actual advising and recommending on decision making. Just
ask a sort of half statement, half question, and also for the record and for the public, I just want to be clear: we're not trading services for youth for services for adult. We're trading shorter term delivery potentially, if we can find the funding, on services for youth and only youth, for rigor to our long-term vision, and ultimately, ideally, the creation of a center that will serve all ages. So I just want to be really clear: we're not saying
not pulling the plug on it.
That's right.
But I think Commissioner Lovell said I don't know who said it. We want the bed. We want the bed right now. But really, in practical terms, that's not what we have available to. So I guess doing the count here, option 1 seems to be the way you have on the board.
And very much that we will, hearing you for sure, Commissioner Lovell, and we feel the same way. We are seeing youth dying in our community, and it was 3 last week who died by suicide in our community. So this is absolutely urgent. It is emergent, and we will continue working with the state and with other funders to get those beds open in Looking Glass for maybe not stabilization center purpose, but for serving our youth.
We've all been touched by the tragedy surrounding youth. Every one of us is on a regular basis, and it really is heartrending to think that we're not doing something to slow that down, to do the part that we can. That's not the case. That's not what's happening here. We're just making a practical decision to go to that high conservative. Anything else? guess we need a motion. We have a motion, now we need a motion. Yeah.
I do. Chair, I move approval of order number 23-11-28-14 in the matter of awarding a contract for stabilization services to Connections Health Services.
Moved by Vice Chair Krieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck. Discussion to the motion. Then I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Passes 3-1 with Commissioner Revolt in opposition and Commissioner Seneca absent. Thank you. Thank you. Bravo on the work. You know, the team that brought this forward put in a lot of hours to bring it forward, and I think did very good justice in noting that option one is what they would prefer to push forward. Give us the choice of option two to at least discuss and to reiterate our two. Excellent. We have 4 more things on our agenda. Actually, we're coming down to the close of the agenda this month. We have a couple of we have 2 more items on here. Commission's business, any announcements, and we'll morph that with maybe any future board assignment requests. The board. Then just one thing that I will mention, Ms. Morgreis, and I said I delay this to the end of the meeting, but I really mentioned that on November 10th, we got a letter from Lynn Focus back on November 10th, talking about the Lake County Taxation Department and specifically called out Daniel Harris taking the time to follow up not only on the request and the problem, but solving the issues. I'm going to read this at the next board meeting in total, but this at the time when people are writing big checks for our taxation assessment, we want to make it as easy as possible to go through the division. I'll put that up more in the next meeting. We don't really have to. I think everybody would like to comment on that particular one. With that, we'll move down with no further items from the commission. So, Ms. Morgreis, remains for you to review assignments. Excellent. And then, we have no further business for today's Board of Commissioners meeting. Thank you.